It was the winter of 1998 when the first rumors started in Ash Grove, a small town in upstate New York where everyone knew everyone else and nothing much ever happened. Snow fell early that year, a thick blanket that stayed past January, and the town was busy preparing for its annual Christmas parade. The parade was the highlight of the year, the one time every resident came together, decorating floats, hanging lights, and lining the streets in scarves and wool hats. And every year, the same Santa appeared. Carl Whitman, a retired school principal who had been playing Santa for over 20 years. He was tall, round, with a laugh that made children giggle and adults nod in comfort. Everyone trusted Carl. Everyone, that is, until he retired. The following year, the town hired a replacement. Nobody really knew him. He gave his name as Stanley Burke, but no one had ever seen him in Ash Grove before. He was a large man, tall and broad, with a long, wiry beard that looked too coarse and dark to be real, and eyes that seemed to flicker oddly in sunlight. On his first appearance, he showed up early to the parade, the red suit hanging a little too loosely over his shoulders, boots scuffed and worn, gloves frayed. There was a stiffness to his movements that made the children uneasy, though none of the adults noticed at first. I first saw him in the town square, the morning he arrived to hand out candy canes before the parade started. I was 17 at the time, working at the corner diner after school to save money for college, and had wandered over to watch. He moved through the crowd like a shadow, nodding at people without a smile. And when he crouched to speak to a child, his voice was low, almost a growl. He didn't laugh. The children laughed nervously because that's what they were supposed to do, but their eyes darted away. Something about him was wrong, but no one knew how to say it aloud. The first incident happened 2 days before Christmas. It was little enough that no one made a connection at first. A 6-year-old boy, Jeremy Clark, went missing. His parents reported him gone late in the evening, and the sheriff's department searched the neighborhood, finding no trace. It was winter, so the initial theory was that he had wandered into the woods behind the school and gotten lost. Search parties went out in the freezing dark, flashlights slicing through snow-laden trees. By morning, there were still no signs of him. The only thing left in the Clark driveway was a single red candy cane placed neatly in the snow. Rumors started circulating, of course. A drifter had come through town. Some drunk had taken him. It didn't help that Stanley Burke was seen near the Clark home on the afternoon. Jeremy disappeared, leaning against a lamppost and watching the snow fall as if it were part of some private joke. When asked about it, he shrugged and muttered, "Kids get themselves into trouble." People thought he was rude, but not dangerous. No one suspected Santa Claus. Then, on Christmas Eve, the nightmare began in earnest. The town gathered at the church for midnight mass. Children were bundled in coats, parents clutching candles. I had gone with my mother, who had been skeptical of Burke from the start, though she had been polite enough to avoid confrontation. We were midway through the service when a sudden commotion erupted outside. People ran to the doors and windows and saw him. Burke, standing in the snow, tossing small packages into the air like they were gifts. The packages exploded upon hitting the ground, shattering to reveal strange things, black feathers, small bones, and, in some, human hair. The townspeople screamed. Police were called, but by the time they arrived, Burke was gone. There were footprints in the snow, but they led in strange, winding patterns that didn't make sense. No one saw him leave, no vehicle, no sound except the faint jingle of bells carried on the wind. The town went into lockdown after that. Curfews were imposed. Streets were patrolled by deputies and volunteers armed with flashlights and rifles. But nothing could stop him. Every night after that, the bells rang. Sometimes faint, sometimes loud enough to make windows vibrate. Packages appeared on doorsteps with the same grotesque contents. Some of the older townsfolk whispered about him appearing in their bedrooms, standing at the foot of the bed, whispering things that were half threats, half confessions. One man, Mr. Halverson, woke to find Burke crouched over him, whispering the secrets of his past sins, the ones he thought no one else knew, his mouth inches from the man's face. Halverson disappeared that night. The only clue was a small red felt cap left on the pillow. By Christmas morning, the town was in chaos. People refused to leave their homes, and the few brave ones who went outside reported seeing Burke standing silently in the middle of the town square, watching them. No one dared approach him. Snow had fallen continuously, blanketing the streets, muffling voices, hiding footprints. The only evidence of his passage were the gifts he left, grotesque and taunting, and the faint smell of something rotten mixed with cinnamon. I saw him that day. He was across from the diner where I worked, standing near the empty playground. His eyes, black and unreadable, locked on mine, and for a moment I felt the weight of 1,000 secrets pressing against my chest. I didn't move. I couldn't. And then he turned, lifted a hand, and waved. It was a slow, deliberate wave, the kind you give to someone you know you're about to destroy. I didn't sleep that night, couldn't eat, couldn't stop shaking. The bodies started appearing after that. First the Clark boy, found in the frozen creek, perfectly preserved, eyes wide, a single red ribbon tied around his wrist. Then the Halverson man, hanged in the barn behind his home, a candy cane pinned to his chest with a carved message, "Naughty." Each death was accompanied by a gift. Sometimes it was something familiar, a toy from childhood, a photograph, an article of clothing. Other times it was impossible, bones, insects, preserved organs, and always the red felt cap. The police were baffled. They questioned Burke, of course. He never denied being Santa, never explained himself. His answers were calm, polite, sometimes poetic. "The list is long," he would say. "I simply check it twice." Nothing made sense. People tried to flee Ashgrove, but the roads became impassable, snowstorms appearing overnight with impossible precision, as if he controlled them. Those who left were often found days later, wandering aimlessly, talking about hearing bells that followed them, about a man in red who whispered their sins aloud. By New Year's Eve, the town was empty. Most families had fled to relatives in other states. The few who remained were barricaded inside their homes, listening to the constant jingling outside. I stayed because I had nowhere else to go. My parents had left me behind, too afraid to stay. I armed myself with kitchen knives and firewood, planning to defend the house if he came. He did come. It was the early hours of New Year's Day. I woke to the sound of bells, louder than ever, ringing right outside my bedroom window. I froze, clutching a knife. The window rattled, and I could see him, Burke, or whatever he truly was, standing in the snow. His beard moved unnaturally, as if alive, twisting and curling. His eyes glowed faintly, black as coal, reflecting the moonlight. He held a sack over his shoulder, moving slowly toward my front door. I tried to scream. My voice caught in my throat. The doorknob rattled. Then it stopped. Silence, except for the bells in the distance. I waited, paralyzed, until dawn, when the snow outside had settled and the tracks were gone. I searched the perimeter, but there was no sign of him. Only a small, wrapped package sat on my porch, a red felt cap. I never wore it. Ashgrove is still there, though it is quieter now. The people who returned after that winter never speak of Burke, never speak of what happened. Christmas celebrations are muted, private, careful. They say he was a man, that he left, that it was a tragedy exaggerated by fear, but I know better. Every December, when the wind shifts just so, I hear the bells, I see shadows in the snow, and I know that somewhere he is watching, checking the list, judging who is naughty and who is nice, and that when the time comes, he will return. I have never forgotten the way he looked at me, the way his eyes penetrated my chest like they were searching for something hidden inside. I have never forgotten the sound of his laugh, the way it started soft and gentle, then twisted into something hollow and terrible. And I have never forgotten the red cap, left on my porch like a promise. You can leave your lights off, your doors locked, your children inside, but that won't matter. He will come. He will always come. And when he does, you will know the true horror of Santa Claus. Story the end. I never believed in Santa Claus. Not in the literal sense, not after I turned 8 and found my father sweating in a red suit in the hallway trying to shove a bicycle down the stairs without waking my mother. After that, Santa became a joke, a mascot, a mall attraction that smelled like old wool and peppermint breath. That belief stayed intact until the winter of 1996, when I lived in a rented farmhouse outside Elk River, Minnesota, and worked nights as a volunteer EMT. The farmhouse sat on a gravel road surrounded by cornfields that went dead and brittle after the first frost. In December, snow piled against the fences and erased the horizon, turning the land into something flat and endless. At night, with the wind moving across it, the fields sounded like breathing. I lived alone then. My wife had moved back to Duluth with our daughter after we separated, and the silence in that house felt physical, like pressure on my ears. Christmas Eve fell on a Tuesday that year. The radio in the ambulance crackled with the usual stuff. A diabetic call in town, a car slid into a ditch 10 miles out. Around midnight, the temperature dropped hard, the kind of cold that makes metal creak. I remember thinking it felt like a night when something bad could happen. At 12:47 a.m., dispatch toned us out to a welfare check. Caller reported lights on at a rural residence. Front door open, no response. The address was familiar. I had been there twice before for minor calls. Once for a kid who broke his arm sledding, once for a woman who fainted while baking. The Larson place. A family with 3 kids, parents in their 30s, church-going, friendly. The kind of house with plastic reindeer in the yard and a wreath on the door. My partner that night was a guy named Tom Hargreave, a mechanic by day, EMT by night, thought with a laugh that sounded like a cough. We drove with the siren off, just the lights, snow crunching under the tires. When we turned onto the Larson driveway, the headlights picked up the front door hanging open, rocking slightly in the wind. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No TV, no music, no crying kids. Just the wind and the hum of our engine. The porch light was on, and there were footprints in the snow, boot prints leading up to the door and then away toward the side of the house. They were deep, heavy, like someone carrying weight. Tom and I grabbed our bags and went up to the porch. Inside, the house smelled wrong. Not smoke, not gas. Something sweet and metallic underneath the pine scent of the Christmas tree. The living room lights were on. The tree was lit, presents stacked beneath it. Wrapping paper was torn open, boxes empty. The couch cushions were overturned. There were streaks on the carpet that looked dark in the light. I said their names, called out. No answer. Tom went toward the kitchen. I headed down the hall toward the bedrooms. Halfway down, I saw a red hat on the floor, crushed, white fur matted. For a second, my brain refused to process it. It was just a Santa hat. Kids leave those everywhere. The master bedroom door was open. The room was wrecked. The mattress was half off the bed. The window was shattered, glass glittering in the snow outside. There was blood on the sheets, on the walls, smeared like someone had tried to wipe it away with their hands. No bodies. I backed out, heart pounding, and almost ran into Tom. His face had gone pale. He shook his head once, tight. He pointed toward the back door. We found the father first, Mark Larson, in the snow behind the house, near the shed. He was barefoot, wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt. His chest was torn open in a way I still can't describe without my stomach turning. It didn't look like a knife wound. It looked like something had pulled him apart with strength that didn't make sense. His face was frozen in a scream. Eyes wide, mouth open, teeth blue with cold. Tom retched into the snow. I forced myself to check for signs of life, knowing there wouldn't be any. The cold had already taken him. His blood had frozen where it spilled, dark and glossy. We called it in. Law enforcement, coroner, backup. While we waited, we followed the tracks. They led from the back of the house toward the tree line at the edge of the field. The snow was churned up like a struggle had happened there. Smaller footprints mixed with the heavy ones. Children's feet, socked or barefoot, dragged. About 50 yards out near the trees, we found the mother, Ellen. She was on her side, curled around nothing, arms bent as if she'd been holding someone. Her throat was gone, not cut, gone. Her eyes were open, staring at the gray sky. We didn't find the kids that night. The sheriff shut the area down. Search teams came out with dogs. The temperature kept dropping. By dawn, it was 20 below. The news vans arrived, their lights flashing against the snow. The story hit the wires before noon. A family slaughtered on Christmas Eve. Children missing. The word Santa wasn't used at first. That came later. They found the oldest boy, Andrew, 2 days later, 3 miles away in a drainage culvert under a county road. He had frozen to death. There were bruises on his wrists and ankles, rope burns. He had been dressed in a Santa coat that swallowed him, sleeves too long, red fabric stiff with ice. No boots, no hat. The middle child, Sarah, was never found. The youngest, a girl named Lily, turned up the following spring when the snow melted, tangled in barbed wire along a fence line. The coroner said animals had gotten to her. What was left suggested she had been alive when she reached the fence, that she had tried to crawl through and failed. The investigation dragged on for months. There were no signs of forced entry. No neighbors reported seeing anything unusual, though one woman down the road said she'd seen a Santa Claus walking along the highway around 11 that night, carrying a sack over his shoulder. She thought it was a prank or someone walking home from a party. The sheriff dismissed it publicly, but privately he asked for more details. She couldn't give much. The suit was old, she said, darkened, not bright red. The beard hung low, stiff. The way he walked bothered her, too heavy, like he was used to carrying things. They found fibers in the house that matched the Santa suit Andrew was wearing. The suit itself was old-fashioned, thick wool, hand-stitched repairs. No tags, no DNA they could match, no footprints they could follow beyond where the snow had been blown smooth. The case went cold. I tried to forget it. I told myself I'd seen worse, that this was just another tragedy in a long line of human cruelty. But Christmas that year and every year after felt poisoned. I stopped volunteering after that winter. I moved back to Duluth to be closer to my daughter. I avoided malls in December. The sight of a red suit made my skin crawl. In 2004, I started working as a building inspector for the county. It was steady, quiet work. I went out to rural properties, checked furnaces, wiring, septic systems. That November, I was assigned to inspect an old hunting lodge that had been sold to a developer. The place was deep in the woods, north of town, accessible only by a narrow road that hadn't been plowed yet. The lodge was older than it looked, built in the 1920s. Logs, dark with age. Inside, it was cold and smelled of dust and animals. I went room to room with my clipboard, checking off items. In a back storage room, behind a stack of broken chairs, I found a trunk. It was heavy, wood reinforced with iron bands. The lock was broken. Inside were clothes, red wool, thick and stiff, a coat, pants, a hat, a beard, yellowed and matted, smelling faintly of sweat and rot. Beneath them, folded carefully, were children's clothes. A small sneaker, a mitten, a plastic reindeer with a cracked antler. My hands shook as I backed away. I called it in. The sheriff at the time was a younger man, new to the job. He listened, took notes, promised to send someone out. By the time they arrived, the trunk was gone. They said I must have been mistaken, that maybe it belonged to a previous owner, some hunter with a dark sense of humor. Without the evidence, there was nothing to do. The developer boarded the place up. It burned down the following summer in a fire blamed on lightning. I started drinking again after that. In December of 2011, my daughter Emily was 8 years old, the age when belief flickers, when magic feels possible and fragile. She was spending Christmas Eve with me that year, the first time since the separation. I tried to make it special. Tree, lights, cookies. I told her stories, avoided Santa as much as I could, but she talked about him anyway, about how he knew if you were good or bad, how he could get into any house. That night, after she went to bed, I sat on the couch, lights off, staring at the tree. Snow had started falling, soft and thick. Around 11, there was a knock at the door. I froze. No one knocks on Christmas Eve that late, not out where I lived then, a small house at the edge of town. The knock came again, heavier this time. I went to the window and peeked through the curtain. There was a figure on the porch, red against the snow, a Santa suit, old, dark. I told myself it was a prank, some neighbor kid, but my heart was pounding hard enough to hurt. I grabbed the phone and called 911, whispering. The dispatcher told me to stay inside. Officers were on the way. The knock turned into a pounding. The door rattled in its frame. Santa, a voice said from the porch. It was low, rough. Open up. Emily cried out from her room, scared. The pounding grew louder. I backed away from the door, grabbed a fireplace poker. The back door burst open with a crash. Wood splintered. The figure filled the doorway, tall, broad, the suit hanging heavy on him. The beard hid his face, but I could see his eyes through it, dark and fixed. He moved fast, faster than he should have. He crossed the kitchen in a few strides. I swung the poker, caught him in the shoulder. It felt like hitting a tree. He didn't even flinch. He reached for me, hands like clubs. I ducked, ran for Emily's room. I slammed the door, threw my weight against it. He hit it once, twice. The hinges screamed. Sirens wailed in the distance. The door exploded inward. He grabbed me by the throat, lifted me off my feet. His breath smelled like cold and old blood. I saw his face then beneath the beard. The skin was gray, stretched tight. The eyes were wrong, too deep, too empty. You were bad, he said. A gunshot cracked the air. The grip on my throat loosened. Another shot, he fell back, crashing into the dresser. He didn't bleed, he didn't scream. He got back up, more shots. He turned toward the door, toward the police lights flashing outside. He moved through the house, through the front door, into the snow. They never caught him. The officers told me later they'd hit him 3 times. Center mass. He ran anyway, disappeared into the trees. They followed tracks for a while, then lost them where the snow had drifted. Emily and I moved the next day. I didn't celebrate Christmas again. I told her Santa wasn't real, not in the way she thought. She cried, but she understood. Years later, after Emily was grown, after the nightmares had faded to something manageable, I started reading about old folklore, about figures that punished instead of rewarded, that wore familiar shapes to get close. Stories of men who became something else through isolation and hunger and ritual. Stories of the wild hunt, of winter spirits. I don't know what he was. I don't know how long he's been walking. I only know that on cold nights, when the snow is deep and the world feels empty, I still listen for footsteps on the porch. I still check the locks. And every Christmas Eve, somewhere in the country, someone sees a Santa Claus where there shouldn't be one and thinks it's a joke until it's too late. Story the end. I grew up believing Santa Claus was just a story parents told to keep kids in line. By the time I was 34, divorced, and working the night shift as a deputy in rural western Pennsylvania, the word Santa meant nothing more than a red suit, cheap beer, and men with bellies paid to wave at kids in shopping malls. I didn't believe in ghosts, miracles, or ancient things hiding behind old traditions. I believed in paperwork, patrol routes, and the smell of cold iron when you open a cruiser door at 2 a.m. That belief died the winter of 2012. It started small, the way all real nightmares do. On December 18th, just after midnight, dispatch sent me to a welfare check outside a town called Larkspur Ridge. Population under 2,000. Logging families, old farms, dead-end roads. The call came from a neighbor who hadn't seen the Miller family in 2 days. Snow had come early that year, heavy and wet, burying driveways and muting sound. When I turned off Route 6 and followed the dirt road into the hills, my headlights felt like they were tunneling through a white wall. The Miller place sat at the end of the road. No lights, no tire tracks. Snow drifted halfway up the porch rail. I knocked, hard enough to make my knuckles ache. No answer. I announced myself and tried the door. It swung inward. The heat was on, humming softly. The living room was neat. Christmas decorations everywhere. A tree stood in the corner, fully lit, ornaments gleaming, wrapped presents sat beneath it untouched. The air smelled faintly metallic, like pennies. I found Mr. Miller first, seated in his recliner, still wearing his work boots. His eyes were open. His throat was gone. I won't describe it in detail. I've written the report enough times. Suffice it to say it wasn't an animal, and it wasn't clean. There was no sign of struggle. Just removal, as if something strong had known exactly where to grab. Mrs. Miller was in the kitchen, same condition. Their daughter Emily, 8 years old, was missing. The only footprints in the house were boot prints. Large, heavy. They tracked in through the front door, across the carpet, and out again. Snow should have melted from them, but it hadn't. The edges were still sharp, like they'd been pressed into flour. We found Emily 3 days later, alive, wandering along the tree line 5 miles from her home. No frostbite, no injuries. She was barefoot and wearing a red sweater 2 sizes too big. When EMTs wrapped her in a blanket, she asked if Santa was mad at her. That should have been the end of it. Tragic, unexplained, filed under unsolved. But the sheriff called me into his office a week later and slid a manila folder across the desk. "You ever heard of the Yule Man?" he asked. I laughed. "You mean like Krampus, that German goat thing?" He didn't smile. "No, this one's older. Comes up every few decades. Appalachians, New England, Midwest, always around Christmas." Inside the folder were photocopies of police reports, some dating back to the 1800s. Different towns, same details. Families slaughtered, children taken and sometimes returned days later, unharmed, but changed. Large boot prints, no signs of forced entry. And in almost every house, Christmas decorations left perfectly intact, like a shrine. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "You're looking at why my predecessor drank himself to death," the sheriff said, "and why I'm asking you to keep your mouth shut." I should have quit then, should have transferred or laughed it off or burned the folder. Instead, I started reading. The name Santa Claus never appeared in those reports, but older ones used other names: Old Nick, the Red Man, St. Nicholas, the Winter Father. A judge in Vermont in 1911 wrote that the suspect appeared as a man of great size clad in red fur bearing bells. The case was dismissed due to mass hysteria. Emily Miller stopped speaking after she came home from the hospital. When she finally did, it was Christmas Eve. Her aunt found her sitting on the floor of her bedroom, arranging her toys in a perfect circle. When asked what she was doing, Emily said she was making room. Santa needed space. A second family died on December 22nd. The Harrisons, 3 towns over. Same pattern. Parents dead, child gone. This time, the kid didn't come back. By Christmas Eve, the phones were ringing nonstop. Reports of something on rooftops. Heavy footsteps. Bells ringing in the woods. One woman swore she saw a man standing at the edge of her yard, taller than the trees, beard hanging down to his chest, eyes like wet coal. At 11:47 p.m., dispatch sent me to a disturbance call at a farmhouse off Old Quarry Road. Caller reported someone trying to come down the chimney. I remember thinking it was a prank. Some drunk kid. Seasonal nonsense. I almost didn't respond. When I pulled up, the house was dark, except for the living room. The front door was wide open. Snow drifted across the threshold. I stepped inside and immediately smelled blood. The fireplace dominated the room. Stockings hung neatly from the mantel. The fire was out, but the bricks were black with soot. Something red was smeared along the hearth. Above me came a sound I will never forget. A deep, wet scraping, like stone on stone. Then a breath. Slow. Patient. I backed away, gun raised, heart pounding so hard it made my vision pulse. The sound stopped. A moment later, something dropped into the fireplace with a heavy thud. He didn't crawl out like in the stories. He stood. The thing that emerged was shaped like a man, but only in the way a bear is shaped like a man when it stands upright. He filled the room. His red coat was thick and dark, matted with age and grime, trimmed with fur that looked more like an animal's pelt than decoration. A belt wrapped his middle, the buckle carved with symbols I didn't recognize. Bells hung from it, each one dull and heavy, ringing softly as he moved. His beard was real. Long, tangled, stiff with old blood. His face was pale, stretched too tight over bone, eyes sunk deep and black, reflecting the firelight like glass. He looked at me and smiled. I fired. 3 rounds center mass. The shots sounded small in that room. The bullets sank into him like stones into mud. He didn't flinch. He took 1 step forward. The floor creaked. I ran. I don't remember getting back to the cruiser. I don't remember calling it in. I remember driving until the road ended and the woods swallowed the headlights. And then I remember sitting there, sobbing, with the engine still running, while bells rang somewhere behind me. The farmhouse burned down later that night. Electrical fire, they said. No bodies found. Christmas morning came anyway. Kids opened presents. Churches filled. The news ran feel-good stories about community and healing. The official line was a fugitive on the loose, but people knew better. They locked their doors, they stayed up all night, they watched their chimneys. Nothing happened on Christmas Day, or the day after, or the day after that. By New Year's, the snow began to melt and life crept back toward normal. I tried to forget. I almost succeeded. 10 years passed. I remarried, moved to Ohio, took a job as a school resource officer. I told myself it was over, that whatever I'd seen had been a combination of stress, darkness, and fear. Then my daughter turned 7. Her name is Lily. She's smart, curious, loves animals, believes deeply in Santa Claus. My wife and I never encouraged it, but we didn't discourage it either. Some magic feels harmless, even necessary. The first sign was the letter. It appeared on December 10th, sitting on the kitchen table when I got home from work. Cream-colored paper, thick. The ink was red, slightly raised, like it had been pressed in hard. It was addressed to Lily. Inside, in careful, looping handwriting, was a message thanking her for being good, for keeping her room clean, for helping her mother, for being patient. It ended with a promise. I will see you soon. My wife laughed it off, said maybe one of the grandparents had dropped it by, but I felt cold all over. That night, Lily told me she'd heard bells outside her window. I didn't sleep. On December 17th, our neighbor's house burned down. Family survived. The fire chief said it started in the chimney. On December 20th, a boy went missing from a town 20 miles away. The news called it an abduction. I dug out the old folder. I'd kept copies, read them again by flashlight while my wife slept beside me. The pattern was the same. Always families with children who believed, always houses decorated early, always letters. I went into the attic and pulled down the Christmas boxes, decorations, ornaments, stockings. I carried them all to the curb and threw them away. Lily cried. My wife yelled. I didn't care. On Christmas Eve, the power went out just after sunset. The house fell into darkness and silence, broken only by the wind. Snow started falling again, thick and heavy. We lit candles, ate a cold dinner. Lily was quiet, watching the windows. At 10:13 p.m., there was a knock at the door. Not a polite knock. A heavy one. Slow. Deliberate. I told my wife to take Lily upstairs and lock the bedroom. I grabbed my old service pistol from the safe. The knock came again, then a voice, deep and warm and wrong. Lily, it said, I've come. I opened the door. He stood on the porch, taller than I remembered. The same red coat, the same bells. Snow clung to him but didn't melt. His eyes fixed on me, and for a moment I swear I saw something ancient there, something patient, something that had been doing this for a very long time. You don't belong here, I said, gun shaking in my hands. He tilted his head. I always belong where I am invited. Behind me upstairs, Lily screamed. He moved faster than anything that size should move. One moment he was on the porch, the next he was inside, the door splintering off its hinges. I fired until the gun was empty. It didn't slow. I don't remember the pain. I remember being thrown into the wall. I remember the sound of footsteps on the stairs. I remember my wife's voice, then silence. When I came to, the house was quiet. The tree we hadn't put up stood in the corner anyway, fully decorated, lights glowing. Presents sat beneath it. Lily was gone. The police found me hours later, half frozen, bleeding, screaming about Santa Claus. They found my wife alive but unconscious, hidden in a closet upstairs. She doesn't remember anything after the lights went out. Lily came back 3 days later. She walked out of the woods behind our house at dawn, wearing a red coat that dragged on the ground. No injuries, no frostbite. She hugged me and told me not to be mad. He says you were bad, she whispered, but I told him you were trying. Lily is 13 now. She's quiet, polite, watches people carefully. Every December, she sets a plate of cookies by the fireplace, even though we don't have one. She rings a little bell before bed. Sometimes late at night, I hear heavy footsteps on the roof. Sometimes I hear bells in the distance. I don't believe in Santa Claus. I know he's real. Story the end. I never believed in Santa Claus beyond the age when belief becomes embarrassing, but I did believe in men. I believed in men do when they think no one is watching. And I believed in the weight of habits carried across decades. I believed in uniforms and rituals and the way a costume can become a license. That's why when I tell people this is a true story, I mean it the way cops and morticians mean it. True, in the sense that the facts happened, and the rest is what the facts did to the people who lived through them. I grew up in a small town in western Pennsylvania where December came early and stayed late. The snow there didn't fall prettily. It arrived in slabs, wind-driven, turning the streets into narrow white corridors and the woods into silent walls. Every year, the town held a Christmas parade on the second Saturday of December. It was a modest affair. High school band, volunteer fire trucks with lights spinning, church floats, but the climax was always Santa. He came last, riding on a flatbed trailer dressed as a sleigh, waving with a white-gloved hand, throwing candy canes into the crowd. Parents would lift their kids so Santa could see them. Old men would take off their hats. That Santa had been the same man for as long as anyone could remember. His name, or the name he went by, was Arthur Bell. Everyone called him Art. He was a retired machinist with a beard that had gone fully white before his hair did. He lived alone in a narrow house on Oak Street after his wife died, and he spent his time woodworking in his garage and volunteering at the VFW. In December, he grew his beard longer, trimmed it just so, and put on the suit that had been altered and re-altered to fit him over the years. People trusted him because he'd been there forever. That's how trust works in small places. It accretes. The year I turned 12, I was old enough to help at the church bazaar. They set me up in the basement to run errands and watch the line for Santa. Kids sat on folding chairs, clutching slips of paper with their wishes. The smell of pine and hot cocoa hung heavy, and somewhere a cassette of carols clicked between songs. I watched Art Santa through the crack of the classroom door they used as his workshop. He sat on a child-sized chair, knees spread, hands resting on the red fabric of his pants. Parents hovered at the edges, cameras ready. Every now and then he would reach out and draw a child closer for a picture. Nothing about it struck me as strange then. It shouldn't have. Ritual dulls the edges of attention. Later that afternoon, while I was carrying a box of ornaments back to the storage closet, I heard a sound from the classroom. It wasn't loud. It was a wet, desperate little gasp, like someone trying not to cry. I stopped, my arms burning from the weight, and listened. A man's voice murmured something I couldn't make out, low and coaxing. Then there was a sharp intake of breath, a whisper of please, and the scrape of a chair leg on linoleum. I did what children do when faced with something that doesn't fit the picture they've been given. I froze, and then I walked away. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself adults knew better. I told myself Santa was Santa. That winter, 3 families moved away abruptly. People said it was work or illness or better schools elsewhere. The town absorbed the loss like it absorbed everything by not talking about it. Years passed. I left for college, then a job. I came back for holidays and funerals. Art kept playing Santa. His suit grew more threadbare. His wave slowed. The parade always ended the same way, with kids chanting his name and parents smiling tiredly. He was the last constant in a town that was otherwise changing, closing in on itself. The first official complaint came in 2004. A mother went to the police with her teenage daughter, who said that when she was 7, Santa had touched her inappropriately during a photo. The officer who took the report was a friend of Art's. He wrote it up carefully and filed it away. The district attorney declined to press charges. There was no evidence, no witnesses. Too much time had passed. The girl's family moved that spring. People shook their heads and said it was a shame how rumors could ruin a good man's name. The second complaint came 2 years later. A boy, now in his 20s, came forward after seeing Art at the parade. He said he'd tried to forget, but seeing the red suit brought it all back. He described the smell of peppermint and old fabric, the pressure of a gloved hand that didn't feel like it should. The police interviewed Art. He denied everything, calmly, with a practiced sadness. He said he dedicated his life to bringing joy to children. He said he'd never hurt anyone. He said he didn't understand how people could think such things about him. The case stalled, no charges, no headlines. The town council quietly asked Art to step down from playing Santa for his own good. He refused. The VFW backed him. The church stayed silent. The parade went on. Then, on December 23, 2008, a call came in to 911 from Oak Street. A neighbor reported a strange smell and lights on at odd hours. The dispatcher noted it as a welfare check. 2 officers went to the house just after dusk. Snow was falling hard. The yard hadn't been shoveled in days. They knocked. No answer. They tried the door. It was unlocked. Inside, the house was warm to the point of being stifling. Christmas lights blinked on a small artificial tree in the living room. Presents were stacked beneath it, wrapped carefully, each labeled with a child's name in neat block letters. The smell was sweet and rotten at the same time. They found Art in the basement. The official report described it clinically: self-inflicted injuries, extensive blood loss, a note written in careful script. The officers stood longer than they needed to, staring at the walls, because the walls were covered. He had lined the basement with photographs, hundreds of them. Children sitting on Santa's lap, smiling, eyes wide. Some were candid, taken in basements and back rooms, not public events. Some were Polaroids curling at the edges. Some were printed from digital files, taped up in rows. Names were written beneath them. Dates, locations, the years stretched back decades. On a table beneath the photos were boxes. Inside were things that belonged to children. Hair ribbons, socks, a small sneaker, a mitten with a reindeer stitched on it. The note, later entered into evidence and sealed, spoke of love and tradition and misunderstandings. It did not apologize. It did not confess. The town reeled briefly. There were meetings, there were prayers, there were articles in the regional paper. The parade was canceled that year. Parents looked at old photos and wondered what they'd missed. Adults called each other and spoke in hushed voices. Survivors came forward, some anonymously, some publicly. The numbers grew, patterns emerged. The truth settled like ash. And then, as it does, life resumed. A new Santa was hired from out of town. The church repainted the basement. The VFW changed leadership. People told themselves it was over. It wasn't. The year after Art died, a boy named Lucas went missing on December 21st. He was 8. He'd last been seen walking home from his grandmother's house just before dark. The search was immediate and massive. Volunteers scoured the woods. Dogs traced scents that disappeared into the snow. Flyers went up. The town held its breath. Lucas was found 3 days later in a culvert near the edge of town, wrapped in a red blanket. He had not been assaulted. He had not been robbed. He had been frozen. The coroner ruled it accidental hypothermia. The police said he'd likely wandered off the road. The family accepted the findings because they had to. The town mourned. Candles were lit. The new Santa attended the vigil, standing at the back, hat in hand. That winter, and the winters that followed, there were stories. Small things at first. Parents said their children woke up with presents they hadn't bought. A woman found a candy cane tucked into her mailbox, old and brittle. Someone swore they saw a man in a red suit standing at the edge of the woods, watching the houses. But when they went back with a flashlight, there was nothing there but snow and trees. People laughed nervously. They said grief did strange things. They said it was nostalgia. In 2012, a janitor at the elementary school found a box in the crawl space above the auditorium. It was wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. Inside were photographs. Not Art's photographs. These were newer. The children were older. The backgrounds were familiar. The handwriting on the labels was shaky but deliberate. Dates, names. The police took the box. They searched records. They interviewed the new Santa, a college student who'd been hired for a few seasons. He was clean. They searched Art's old house, now owned by a young couple who had renovated it thoroughly. Nothing. The box went into evidence. No charges were filed. That Christmas Eve, the town lost power during a storm. Snow fell sideways. Roads closed. Families huddled around fireplaces and candles. Sometime after midnight, while the storm howled and transformers popped in the distance, several homes reported their chimneys blocked. Smoke-filled living rooms. One family barely made it out in time. The fire department worked through the night. When the sun rose, they found the blockages were not nests or debris, but carefully packed bundles of fabric and paper. Red fabric. Wrapped around the fabric were notes written in careful block letters. They said simply, "Naughty." The town council held an emergency meeting. The mayor urged calm. The police chief asked for patience. A state investigator was brought in. They talked about copycats and hysteria. They talked about vandals. On December 26th, a woman named Sarah Klein called 911 to report that someone was on her roof. The dispatcher heard wind and panic and a child crying in the background. Officers arrived minutes later. They found footprints in the snow leading up to the chimney and away again toward the woods. They found a small red glove on the roof, old and frayed. They found nothing else. Sarah's daughter, Emma, refused to sleep in her room after that. She said Santa had come early. She said he'd whispered her name through the vent. She said he'd asked if she'd been good. Psychologists were brought in. They talked to the kids. They used gentle voices and careful words. They told parents about suggestibility and stress. They told them to turn off the news. But the things kept happening. A mail carrier reported seeing a sleigh-shaped shadow moving between houses at dawn. A security camera caught a figure in red standing in a yard for hours, unmoving, until the image glitched and went black. A man driving home late swore he'd hit something soft on the road and found a sack full of wrapped presents in the ditch. Inside were items that had gone missing from local homes over the years. The state investigator dug deeper into Art's past. He found that Art had been abused as a child by a man who dressed as Santa at a department store in the 1940s. He found that Art had been institutionalized briefly in his 20s, then released. He found gaps in records, moves between towns, years where nothing was documented. He found other towns with similar stories, similar men, similar silences. The theory that emerged was unsatisfying and bureaucratic. Trauma begets trauma. Abuse perpetuates itself. Someone else had picked up the suit. Someone else was using the myth as cover. Then, on December 20th, 2015, the investigator disappeared. His car was found abandoned on a plowed road near the woods. The engine was cold. The doors were unlocked. On the passenger seat was a folded piece of paper. It had a list of names. All of them were children who had accused Art years earlier. Some had moved away, some had changed their names. The list was crossed through one by one in red ink. The search for the investigator lasted weeks. The snow melted and refroze. The woods gave up nothing. The case was eventually closed, marked unresolved. People stopped decorating. The parade was canceled indefinitely. Stores stopped hiring Santas. Parents told their children Santa wasn't real, earlier than they might have otherwise, as a kind of inoculation. The town's December grew quiet, heavy with a different kind of expectation. I moved back around then to care for my mother. I took a job at the local paper. I started digging, carefully, because I needed to understand what had happened in the place that raised me. I read reports and notes and old articles. I talked to survivors. I walked the woods. I sat in the church basement and breathed the smell of fresh paint and old secrets. One night, as I was leaving the office late, I found a package on my desk. There was no return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed me, at 12, standing in the church basement with a box of ornaments in my arms. Behind me, in the crack of the classroom door, a red sleeve was visible. On the back of the photo, written in careful block letters, was my name. I went to the police. They took the photo. They asked me questions. They told me to be careful. They assigned a patrol to drive by my house at night. On December 24th, my mother fell asleep early. The house was quiet. Snow fell softly. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring at the window. Around midnight, I heard a sound on the roof. Slow, deliberate. I did not freeze this time. I grabbed my phone and my father's old baseball bat and went to the fireplace. The flue was open. Cold air poured down. I heard breathing. I heard fabric scrape brick. I shouted. I swung the bat up into the chimney. There was a thud, a curse, a rush of movement. Something fell past me and landed in the living room in a heap of red and white. The man beneath the suit was old. Not Art, but old in the same way. His beard was real, stained with soot. His eyes were bright with something like relief. He smiled at me. "You saw," he said. "You always did." The police arrived quickly. They took him away. In the back of the cruiser, he hummed a carol. His name was never released to the public. In his house, they found photographs and boxes and lists. They found evidence tying him to several of the incidents over the years. They found letters from Art written decades earlier, speaking of duty and tradition and the need to correct wrongs. The town tried to move on again. Trials happened. Sentences were handed down. Headlines faded. Sometimes, late at night in December when the snow is falling just so, I still hear something on the roof. Sometimes I find a candy cane on my desk at the paper, old and brittle. Sometimes I think about how myths survive because we feed them, because we want them, because they give shape to things we can't otherwise face. Santa Claus, after all, is a story about a man who watches children closely, who enters homes uninvited, who judges and rewards and punishes. We tell it because it comforts us. We don't look too hard at what it gives permission to. I lock my doors now, I close my flue, I don't attend parades, and every year when December comes early and stays late, I remember the sound of a wet, desperate little gasp in a church basement, and I wish I had understood sooner what kind of story we were really telling. Story the end. The first time I saw him, I was 7 years old and hiding behind the living room couch because I couldn't sleep. It was Christmas Eve in rural Minnesota, the kind of night where the cold feels alive, pressing against the windows like something curious. My parents thought I was in bed. The tree lights were the only illumination, blinking softly, throwing green and red shadows across the walls. I heard the sound before I saw anything. A heavy thump on the roof. Not sliding snow, not wind. A deliberate impact, followed by a slow, dragging noise. My heart hammered so hard I was afraid it would give me away. I remember thinking, with absolute certainty, Santa was real, and he was here. The fireplace rattled, ash fell down like gray snow. Something scraped inside the chimney, metal against brick. Then boots hit the hearth with a dull, meaty sound. He stood up slowly, as if savoring the moment. He was bigger than I imagined Santa would be, shoulders wide, belly round, but solid. The suit was darker than the bright red I saw in pictures, almost maroon, and it looked old, worn thin in places, stained in others. His beard was thick and yellowed, not fluffy white, and his eyes were wrong. They were sharp, alert, scanning the room like he was checking exits. He didn't notice me at first. He went straight to the tree and crouched, placing presents with care. He whispered names as he did it. My name, my sister's, my parents'. When he finally turned and saw me, his smile was immediate and terrifying, stretching too wide. There you are, he said softly. Good children don't spy, but curious ones sometimes can't help it. I should have screamed. I didn't. I couldn't move. He stepped closer and I smelled him. Smoke, metal, something sour underneath. He crouched down so his face was level with mine. His breath fogged in the cold air. You didn't see anything, he said, and I won't have to check my list twice. Then he reached into his sack and pulled out a small wooden toy, a carved horse. He pressed it into my shaking hands. His glove was rough, stiff like it had dried wrong. Remember, he whispered, I'm always watching. He stood, stepped back into the fireplace, and vanished upward with impossible speed. The ashes settled. The house was silent again. In the morning, the presents were there. The wooden horse was there. My parents laughed when I told them. They said I had a vivid imagination. They said Christmas magic does that to kids. For years, I believed it was a dream. Then I grew up. I moved away. College, marriage, a job in Chicago. Life filled in the gaps where childhood fear used to live. Santa became a joke, a mascot in a mall, a man sweating in polyester, until my mother died. I went back to Minnesota to clean out the house. The same house. The fireplace had been sealed years earlier, converted to gas. The roof had been replaced twice. Everything was modern, safe. While sorting through the basement, I found the wooden horse. I knew instantly it wasn't one of my toys. My parents hadn't kept much. But there it was, wrapped in yellowed newspaper, tucked inside a box labeled Xmas. When I picked it up, something rattled inside. There was a seam on the bottom I had never noticed. I pried it open. Inside was a folded scrap of paper, brittle with age. It had a name on it. Not mine. A girl's name. Local. I recognized the last name from school. She disappeared when I was a kid. Everyone said she ran away. I drove to the old police station the next day. The building was half abandoned. Records moved to a regional office. A board clerk pulled the file. The girl had vanished on December 24th, 32 years ago. No suspects. No body. I went back home sick with a feeling I couldn't shake. That night, I searched online, old news articles, archived forums. I found more names, more disappearances. Always December. Always within a 50-mile radius. Always unsolved. And always rumors. Stories of a Santa who wasn't right, a Santa who showed up where he wasn't invited, a Santa who knew children too well. Most were dismissed as urban legends. Then I found a forum post from 10 years earlier, a man claiming he'd seen Santa kill someone. He said Santa didn't give gifts to naughty children. He collected them. I reached out. The account was inactive. 2 days later, someone knocked on my hotel door. I opened it to find an old man in a red jacket, no hat, no beard, just a man. His hair was white. His eyes were sharp. You shouldn't dig into things that keep themselves buried, he said. I slammed the door and locked it. When I looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty. That night, I dreamed of the fireplace rattling. I flew back to Chicago early. I tried to forget, but once you see a pattern, it doesn't unsee itself. That December, my daughter turned 6. She believed in Santa with the same fierce certainty I once had. She wrote letters. She set out cookies. She asked me if Santa ever got tired of watching so many children. I laughed too loudly and said no. On Christmas Eve, we stayed up late watching movies. She fell asleep on the couch. I carried her to bed and stood in the doorway for a long time, listening to her breathe. Then I heard it. A thump. Not on the roof. On the balcony outside her room. We lived on the 3rd floor. The glass door handle turned slowly. I grabbed the nearest thing I could, a lamp, and moved toward the sound. The door slid open an inch. Cold air spilled in. A red-gloved hand pushed through. I screamed and swung. The lamp shattered against the doorframe. The hand withdrew. Something heavy dropped onto the balcony below with a wet sound. I called the police. They searched the building. They found nothing, except a sack. It was caught on a lower railing. Old canvas. Inside were toys, new, expensive, and beneath them, folded neatly, a stack of papers. Names. My daughter's name was on top. The police took it seriously this time. Surveillance footage from nearby buildings showed a figure climbing the exterior fire escape with inhuman ease. His face was never clear. The suit was unmistakable. They never caught him, but the incident stopped in our area. Months later, I received a package in the mail. It had no return address. Inside was the wooden horse. The seam had been glued shut. On the bottom, burned into the wood, were the words, "Good parents watch too." Every year since, I stay awake on Christmas Eve. I don't tell my daughter Santa is real anymore. I don't tell her he isn't. I just make sure the doors are locked, the balcony is clear, the fireplace is sealed, because I know now what Santa Claus really is. Not a man, a role. And as long as someone believes enough to wear the suit, to carry the list, to justify the watching, Santa never truly dies. Story the end. The first time I heard the bells, I was 7 years old, and lying awake in my bedroom in rural Indiana, staring at glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to my ceiling. Snow pressed softly against the window, muting the world the way it always does when winter settles in deep enough to feel permanent. My parents thought I was asleep. They were downstairs, wrapping presents, arguing in whispers the way adults do when they think children can't hear. The bells were slow and distant, not the cheerful jingle from TV commercials, but something heavier, like iron knocking against iron. They came from above the house. I slid out of bed and crept to the window. Our roof sloped down past my view, but I could see the barn across the yard, its roof blanketed in white. The bells rang again, closer now, followed by a dull thump that rattled the glass. I remember smiling, heart pounding, because every story I'd ever been told said this was the night something wonderful happened. I ran back to bed and pulled the covers up to my chin, afraid that if I watched too closely, the magic might vanish. By morning, my father was dead. The official story was a heart attack. He'd been found on the living room floor beside the fireplace, one hand stretched toward the stockings. The coroner said it happened fast, peaceful. But I remember the bruises on his neck, purple and finger-shaped, half hidden by the collar of his flannel shirt. I remember the way the firebox was cracked, bricks pushed inward as if something far heavier than a man had come down through it. No one listened when I told them about the bells. Years passed. Childhood blurred into adolescence, adolescence into adulthood. I left Indiana for college in Illinois, then settled in Wisconsin with a job in municipal records. A quiet life, paperwork, fluorescent lights, the kind of work where nothing unexpected is supposed to happen. I married, divorced, remarried. I had a son, Michael. I told myself I wouldn't lie to him the way my parents lied to me, but some lies feel harmless until they aren't. Santa was one of them. A story. A tradition. Something soft to pad the hard edges of the world. The first December after my father's death, my mother threw away all our Christmas decorations. She said it was too painful. By the time I was 10, she had started putting them back up again, carefully, as if negotiating with an invisible force. By the time I was 15, she drank herself to sleep every Christmas Eve. She died in a single-car accident when I was 22. The road had been clear, the weather mild. The police said she'd swerved suddenly as if avoiding something that wasn't there. I didn't think about Santa Claus for a long time after that. The winter, Michael turned 8. The snow came early and thick, just like it had when I was a kid. My wife loved Christmas. She decorated the house in late November, every surface covered in lights and garland and little ceramic figures. Michael wrote his letter to Santa with painstaking care, listing his good deeds in neat block letters. He asked for a telescope, a new bike, and for Dad to be happier. I laughed when I read that last part. Told him Santa wasn't a therapist. On December 12th, I came home from work to find an envelope on the kitchen counter. No stamp, no return address. Michael's name was written on the front in red ink. I asked my wife if she'd put it there. She shook her head, smiling. "Maybe your mom," she said, then remembered and went quiet. Inside the envelope was a note written in the same careful script I remembered from my childhood Christmas cards. "I see you. I am pleased." My stomach tightened in a way I couldn't explain. That night, Michael told us he'd heard someone walking on the roof. He said it sounded like someone very heavy, moving slowly, stopping right above his room. He said he'd heard breathing, deep and patient, like someone waiting their turn. I told him it was the house settling. The wind. A raccoon. Anything but the truth I didn't want to name. 3 days later, a family 2 blocks over lost their daughter. She vanished from her bedroom sometime after midnight. The police said there were no signs of forced entry. The chimney showed unusual damage, but the fire department chalked it up to age and weather. The mother insisted she'd heard bells before she went to sleep. The news reported it as trauma-induced confusion. On December 18th, another child disappeared. Then another. The pattern crawled back into my mind like something that had been waiting there all along. I went to the library and requested old newspaper microfilm. I searched for keywords: Christmas, chimney, missing child, bells. I found stories going back more than a century, scattered across states and decades. Always winter. Always families with children who believed. Sometimes the kids came back. Sometimes they didn't. When they did, they were never the same. Michael started acting differently, quieter, more obedient than any 8-year-old has a right to be. He cleaned his room without being asked. He watched me constantly, eyes tracking my movements like he was afraid I might do something wrong. He says you need to be careful, Michael told me one night as I tucked him in. Who says? I asked, though I already knew. Santa, he whispered. He's watching. I stopped sleeping. I checked the locks 3 times a night. I nailed the attic hatch shut. I covered the fireplace with plywood and bricks. My wife told me I was overreacting, that I was scaring our son. On December 23rd, the power went out just after sunset. The snowstorm that night was the kind meteorologists would later call historic. Roads vanished. Cell service dropped to nothing. We lit candles and tried to pretend it was cozy. At 9:02 p.m., the bells started. They rang from far away at first, muffled by the storm, then closer, heavier, each step announced by the dull crunch of snow under immense weight. I told my wife to take Michael upstairs and lock themselves in the bedroom. She argued until the bells reached the front porch. The knock was not a knock. It was a single, crushing impact that bowed the door inward on its hinges. A voice followed, warm and resonant, carrying easily through the house. Michael, it said, I've come. I stood in the hallway with a shotgun I barely remembered loading. My hands shook so badly I was afraid I'd drop it. The second impact tore the door free. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of pine and old blood. He filled the doorway, ducking slightly as he stepped inside. Taller than any man I'd ever seen. Broad enough that his shoulders brushed both sides of the frame. His coat was red, but not the bright red of cartoons. This was dark, worn, stained. Fur trimmed his sleeves and collar, coarse and gray. Bells hung from his belt, each one larger than my fist, ringing softly as he moved. His beard reached his chest, tangled and stiff. His eyes were black and deep, reflecting the candlelight like wet stone. I fired. The blast knocked me back a step. The pellets struck him squarely, tearing holes in the coat. He looked down at them with mild interest, then back at me. You have been struggling, he said, but you have tried. He moved past me with terrifying speed. The floor groaned under his weight as he crossed the living room. I chased him, screaming, firing again and again. None of it mattered. The upstairs door splintered under a single blow. My wife's scream cut off abruptly. By the time I reached the bedroom, it was over. The room was empty, except for the open window and the sound of bells fading into the storm. They found me hours later, wandering the street in my bare feet, shouting about Santa Claus. The police found my wife alive, barely, unconscious in the closet where she'd hidden. She never fully recovered. Some part of her stayed locked in that night. Michael came back 2 days later. He walked out of the woods behind our house at dawn, wearing a red coat far too big for him. He was clean, unhurt, calm. I was good, he told me, hugging me tightly. He said I did very well. Michael is 16 now. He gets straight A's, never breaks rules, never lies. Every December, he leaves an offering by the fireplace we no longer use. Cookies, milk, sometimes meat. Sometimes late at night, I hear bells on the roof. Sometimes I hear heavy footsteps pacing, stopping directly above my bedroom. I don't believe in Santa Claus. I know what he is. Story the end. I never believed in Santa Claus. Not really. Even as a kid growing up in rural Pennsylvania, I knew there was always a man behind the beard. My father played Santa at church events, sweating through rented suits, the fake beard slipping sideways when he laughed. I saw the zippers, the Velcro, the seams. Santa was a costume, a role, something people put on and took off. That belief stayed with me into adulthood, which is why what happened to me still doesn't make sense, no matter how many years I've had to think about it. I was 32 when it started. I just moved to a small town in northern Michigan for a job managing a storage facility on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place people forgot existed unless they needed to stash old furniture or boxes they didn't want to look at anymore. Long rows of metal units, gravel crunching under tires, wind howling off Lake Superior in the winter, cheap rent, quiet nights. December came early that year. Snow piled up fast, thick and heavy, and the town leaned into Christmas harder than anywhere I'd ever lived. Every lamppost had wreaths. Every storefront played the same old carols on a loop. There was a Santa at the grocery store, another outside the hardware shop ringing a bell for donations, and posters everywhere advertising the town's annual Santa Walk, where dozens of men dressed as Santa marched down Main Street for charity. I didn't participate. I worked late hours and kept to myself. Most nights, I locked up the storage facility around 9, my breath fogging in the air as I made my rounds, flashlight beams sweeping across padlocks and corrugated metal doors. About a week before Christmas, I noticed one unit I didn't remember renting out. Unit 312 sat at the far end of the property, close to the tree line. It wasn't unusual to forget individual renters, but this one bothered me. The lock was old-fashioned, heavy iron instead of the modern combination locks most people used. The metal door was scratched and dented, the paint faded to a darker red than the rest. I checked the ledger. Unit 312 wasn't listed. I assumed it was a clerical error from before I'd taken over. Still, protocol said all units had to be accounted for. I knocked on the metal door with my knuckles. The sound echoed, hollow and deep, like knocking on a coffin lid. Something inside shifted. I froze, my hand still raised. "Hello?" I called out, feeling stupid immediately. There was no answer. Just silence, thick and pressing. After a moment, I convinced myself it had been settling metal or a rat. I made a note to cut the lock the next day and headed back to the office, the uneasy feeling sticking with me longer than I liked. That night, I dreamed of bells. Not cheerful jingle bells, but heavy iron ones, ringing slow and deliberate. Each toll vibrated through my chest. I dreamed of snow falling endlessly, of rooftops stretching into the dark, and of something moving above me, unseen but enormous. I woke up sweating, heart racing, the sound of a bell still echoing in my ears. The next morning, Unit 312 was gone. I stood at the end of the row, staring at the gap where it had been. Units 311 and 313 sat on either side, perfectly normal. The gravel was undisturbed, no sign of demolition or removal. It was as if the unit had never existed. I checked the property map. No Unit 312. I told myself I'd miscounted. Stress does that. The mind fills in gaps. That evening, as I locked up, I heard singing. It drifted from the woods beyond the property line, faint but unmistakable. A deep voice, slow and melodic, humming a tune that sounded like an old Christmas carol when I couldn't quite place. I followed the sound to the fence line, my flashlight cutting through the trees. "Hello?" I called again, feeling ridiculous. The singing stopped. For a long moment, there was only the wind through the branches. Then something heavy moved in the woods. Branches snapped. Snow fell from trees in soft avalanches. I backed away, my skin crawling. When I turned and walked quickly to my truck, I didn't look back. Over the next few days, strange things piled up. I found soot on my office desk one morning, black smudges shaped like fingerprints. The security cameras glitched at night, static washing over the screens between midnight and 3 a.m. Every time I reviewed the footage, the same thing happened. At exactly 12:25, all cameras froze for 3 minutes. When they came back, the timestamp jumped forward as if time itself had skipped. On December 21st, a woman came into the office asking about a unit her father had rented years ago. "He dressed like Santa," she said casually, flipping through old photos on her phone. "Every Christmas, he'd put on the suit and disappear for the night. Said he was helping people." I frowned. "Disappear?" She laughed. "That's what he said. He was a bit eccentric." "What unit was it?" I asked. She hesitated. "I don't remember the number, but it was red, dark red. He kept it locked year-round." My mouth felt dry. "What happened to him?" Her smile faded. "He vanished, Christmas Eve, 10 years ago. Left the house in his Santa suit and never came back. Police thought he wandered into the woods and froze. They never found the body." That night, the bell returned in my dreams, louder than before. This time I saw hands, huge gloved hands, gripping the edge of a chimney. I saw teeth stained black with soot. I woke up screaming. On December 23rd, I found Unit 312 back where it had been. It looked newer than before, freshly painted, the red vivid and glossy. The iron lock gleamed, untouched by rust. Snow around it was smooth and unbroken. I didn't call the police. I don't know why. Maybe some part of me already knew they wouldn't help. I went back to the office and grabbed the bolt cutters. It took effort to break the lock. When it finally snapped, the sound echoed across the empty property. I pulled the door up slowly, metal screeching in protest. The smell hit me first. Smoke. Old fire. Rot. Inside, the unit was much larger than it should have been. The walls stretched back into darkness, the ceiling lost in shadow. The floor was covered in ash, footprints pressed deep into it, boot prints, far larger than mine. At the center stood a workbench. On it lay a Santa suit, not like the cheap ones from stores. This was thick, heavy wool, stained dark in places. The fur trim was matted and yellowed. The beard was real hair, stiff and tangled. Beside it sat a bell, iron and massive, its surface etched with symbols I didn't recognize. As I stared, something shifted behind me. The door slammed shut. The darkness swallowed everything. I spun around, slamming my shoulder into metal. I screamed, pounding on the door, my voice echoing uselessly. Then I heard breathing, slow, deep, right behind me. The bell rang. Light exploded around me, not bright but cold, moonlit. The walls were gone. I stood on a rooftop under a starless sky, snow swirling violently around us. He stood in front of me, Santa Claus, but not the smiling, friendly version. This thing was enormous, taller than any man, shoulders hunched as if weighed down by centuries. His suit was red but darkened, stiff with age. His beard hung in thick ropes, blackened at the ends. His eyes were pale and endless like frozen lakes. "You opened the door," he said, his voice vibrating through the air. "I want no part of this," I said, my teeth chattering. He laughed, and the sound was like bells breaking. "Everyone says that." Images flooded my mind. Children huddled in cold houses, cruel parents, broken homes, fires left burning, Santa moving through the world not as a giver but as a judge. He was never kind, the thing said. Not at first. I felt the suit pulling toward me, wrapping around my body like a living thing. I fought, screaming, but it was useless. The wool fused to my skin, the beard grew from my face, tearing and burning. "No," I begged. "Please." "You wore the red," he said. "You took the name. Now you finish the work." The world spun. I came to lying in the snow outside the storage facility, naked, my body covered in burns and frostbite. Dawn was breaking. Sirens wailed somewhere distant. They told me later that fires broke out across town that night, that people swore they saw Santa on rooftops, that some homes were spared while others were destroyed completely. They never found Unit 312 again. I survived, barely. I moved away after my release from the hospital, changed my name, avoided Christmas entirely. But every year on Christmas Eve, I wake up to the sound of a bell, and sometimes when I look in the mirror, my beard looks a little thicker, my eyes a little paler. I know he's not gone. He's just waiting. Story, the end. The first time I put on the suit, it smelled like old pennies and damp wool. I noticed it before anything else. Not the weight of it, not the way the fake beard scratched my chin, but the smell. Metallic and wet, like something that had been buried and dug up again. The suit had been in a garment bag hanging in the back room of the mall since October, according to the assistant manager, and nobody could remember who brought it in. There was paperwork missing. The invoice had no company name, just a stamp and a handwritten note that said, "Approved." I needed the money. My wife had left in August, taking most of the furniture and half my savings, and the heating bill for the little rental on Maple Street was already climbing. When the ad went up, "Seasonal Santa, experience preferred but not required," I didn't hesitate. I'd played Santa once at a church charity when I was younger. Smile, ho ho ho, ask kids what they want. Easy. The assistant manager, Denise, was a nervous woman with brittle hair and fingers stained with nicotine. She told me the last Santa quit without notice. Didn't say why, she said, not meeting my eyes. Just didn't come back after the third day. I asked about the suit. She shrugged. Corporate sent it. That was the first lie. The dressing room was small, with a mirror that had a crack running through it like a lightning bolt. When I put the hat on, I felt a pressure behind my eyes, a dull throb that made the room tilt. I laughed it off. Too tight, I thought. I adjusted the strap. The pressure didn't go away, but it settled, like something finding its place. The first child was a girl with braids and a missing front tooth. She climbed onto my lap without fear. "What do you want for Christmas?" I asked, practicing the voice. She leaned close, her breath warm against my ear. "I already told you," she whispered. I pulled back, confused. "You did?" She nodded, serious. "Last night, you were standing by my bed." Her mother laughed, embarrassed, and tugged her down. "She has an imagination," she said. The girl kept looking at me as they walked away, her eyes too steady for her age. By the end of the first day, I had a headache that felt like a nail being driven slowly into my skull. When I took the suit off, my shirt was damp with sweat, and there were faint red marks around my wrists and waist, like I'd been tied too tight. I chalked it up to stress. That night, I dreamed of snow falling inside my house. It piled up on the kitchen table, the couch, the floor. I stood in the doorway watching it, unable to move as bells rang somewhere above me. When I woke, there was frost on the inside of my bedroom window, even though the heater was on full blast. The second day, more children whispered things they shouldn't know. A boy told me about the dog I'd had as a kid, the one that got hit by a truck. A girl asked if I was still mad about the ring she'd hidden under the loose board in the hallway. Each time I felt that pressure behind my eyes increase, like a hand pressing down. I asked Denise if anything strange had happened with the suit before. She stubbed out her cigarette too hard. "Don't start," she said. "I've got enough problems." On the third day, a man in a black coat stood at the edge of the crowd and watched me. He didn't bring a child. He didn't smile. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on me. When our gazes met, he nodded once, slow and deliberate, like he was acknowledging a promise. That night, there were footprints in the snow outside my house. Bare footprints. They led from the street to my front door and stopped. I didn't open it. I stood there listening to my own breathing until the sun came up. By the end of the week, I wasn't sleeping. When I closed my eyes, I saw places I'd never been and remembered things I was sure hadn't happened. I remembered chimneys too small for a man to fit through, remembered squeezing down them anyway, bones bending like wet wood. I remembered the sound of children breathing in the dark, remembered the weight of a sack over my shoulder that thumped and shifted like it was alive. I told myself it was the stress, the lack of sleep. I took painkillers. I drank too much coffee. I went back to the mall. On December 15th, a boy sat on my lap and asked for his father back. He didn't mean to, the boy said, his voice flat. He was just angry. "You can bring him back, right?" I swallowed. "I can't do that," I said. The boy's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't cry. "You always could before," he said. When he left, there was a wet stain on my pants that wasn't urine. It was blood. I didn't feel any pain. I locked myself in the dressing room and examined my legs. There was a thin cut on my thigh, shallow but bleeding. It looked like a fingernail mark. That night, I woke to the sound of bells. Real bells, not the ones from my dreams. They were close, just outside my bedroom window. I lay still, heart hammering as something moved on the roof. Heavy footsteps, a scrape like metal on brick. The window creaked open. Cold air poured in, carrying that same metallic smell as the suit. I squeezed my eyes shut and pretended to be asleep. A hand brushed my hair. Large, rough, cold. A voice whispered my name. Not my nickname, not the name my wife used, but my full name, the one only my mother ever said when she was angry. "Get up," the voice said. "You're late." I opened my eyes. He stood at the foot of my bed, impossibly tall, his shoulders brushing the ceiling. His suit was red, but not the bright red of felt. This was dark, stained, threadbare in places. His beard was real, yellowed and matted. His eyes were blue and empty, like winter sky. "You're wearing my clothes," he said, not accusing, just stating a fact. I don't know what you're talking about," I said. My voice sounded small. He smiled and his teeth were too many. "You do," he said. "You just forgot." He reached out and pressed 2 fingers to my forehead. The pressure behind my eyes exploded, and suddenly I remembered everything. I remembered the first winter, the hunger so sharp it felt like knives. I remembered the village buried in snow, the children thin and coughing, the parents desperate. I remembered making a bargain with something older than the cold, something that wore the night like a cloak. I remembered the rules, gifts for the good, punishment for the bad, and a price paid in blood to keep the balance. I remembered dying. I remembered not staying dead. When he took his fingers away, I was sobbing. I don't want this, I said. I didn't agree to this. You did, he said gently. You always do. That's how it works. He told me the man in the black coat was a keeper, one of the watchers who made sure the cycle continued. He told me the suit chose its wearer, that it had found me because I was empty enough, broken enough to remember what I used to be. You can refuse, he said. They always can. But then there's no Santa, no balance. What happens if there's no Santa? I asked. He looked at me for a long time. Then the bad aren't punished, he said, and the good don't matter. When he left, the bells faded and the frost on the window melted. I sat there until morning, shaking. I didn't go back to the mall the next day. Denise called me 3 times. I didn't answer. I packed a bag and drove until I hit the state line. I checked into a motel and tried to sleep. That night, the dreams were worse. Children screaming, fire instead of snow. I woke with my hands clenched around an imaginary sack. On December 20th, the news reported a string of home invasions. No forced entry, no fingerprints. In each case, a parent had been found dead, their bodies arranged under the Christmas tree. The children were unharmed. In some cases, they were smiling. I turned off the TV and vomited in the sink. The suit was waiting for me when I got back to my car, folded neatly on the back seat. The smell filled the motel room. I slammed the door and ran. I didn't get far. The man in the black coat stepped out of the shadows at the end of the parking lot. You're making this harder than it needs to be, he said. I won't do it, I said. Find someone else. There is no one else, he said. Not this year. He didn't touch me. He didn't have to. The pressure behind my eyes returned, stronger than ever, and the memories flooded back. The rules, the bargain, the necessity. I put the suit on. Christmas Eve came too fast. I moved through the night like a sleepwalker, guided by instincts older than reason. Chimneys opened for me. Doors unlocked themselves. I left toys and took what was owed. I told myself it was justice. I told myself it was necessary. In one house, a man woke up as I stood over him. He tried to scream. I pressed a gloved finger to his lips. You know what you did, I said, and he did. He begged. They always beg. In another house, a woman knelt and thanked me, tears streaming down her face as I carried her husband away. He hurt them, she whispered. He hurt us. By dawn, the sack was heavy and still. I stood on a hill overlooking the town, the snow pristine and pink with sunrise. For a moment, I felt something like peace. Then I felt the weight of it settle fully on me. The knowledge that this would never end, that even if I refused next year, the suit would find someone else, and I would be hunted, punished for breaking the cycle. On Christmas morning, the mall was closed. The suit hung in my closet, clean and folded. The pressure behind my eyes was gone, replaced by a dull ache in my chest. I tried to go back to my old life. I got a job at a warehouse. I smiled at strangers. I avoided children. Every December, the bells start ringing in my dreams again. Every December, the frost creeps across the inside of my windows. This year, the ad is up again. Seasonal Santa. Experience preferred. I can feel the suit calling to me from wherever it is now, patient and inevitable. I don't know how much longer I can resist. If you're reading this because you found it in a box in the attic, or because someone handed it to you with shaking hands and told you to remember, know this. Santa Claus is real. He always has been, and he's very, very tired. Story the end. The first winter I worked for the county roads department was the winter they found the sleigh marks. I was 26, newly divorced, living in a rented ranch house outside of Stillwater, Minnesota, where the St. Croix bends like a stiff elbow and the cold seems to come from the ground as much as the sky. The job paid well enough, and I liked the hours. Early mornings, plows out before dawn, coffee burned black in the depot. Christmas was just another date on the calendar to me that year, something to get through without thinking too hard. On December 21st, after a night of heavy snow, I was assigned to County Road 13, a 2-lane blacktop that cut through pine and scrub oak for miles with no houses, no gas stations, just a rest area, and a logging road that hadn't been used in years. Around mile marker 18, I noticed the tracks. They weren't tire tracks. They weren't footprints either. They were long, shallow grooves pressed into the snow on either side of the road, running parallel for maybe 40 yards before vanishing into the trees. Between them were deep, round impressions spaced evenly apart, like something heavy had landed, lifted, landed again. I got out of the truck, the cold biting through my gloves, and crouched to look closer. The grooves were too wide for skis and too smooth for chains. I put my hand into one of the round impressions and felt compacted snow all the way down to frozen dirt. Whatever made them had weight. I radioed it in as animal tracks, moose maybe, or elk, but my supervisor laughed and told me to keep plowing. By the time I came back that way in the afternoon, a fresh dusting had softened the edges, and by nightfall they were gone. I would have forgotten about it if not for what happened on Christmas Eve. That night, Stillwater had its annual parade. Kids bundled like laundry baskets, parents holding paper cups of cider, the high school band shivering through off-key carols. At the end of the parade came Santa, waving from the back of a fire truck, red suit bright against the snow. I stood near the curb with my sister's kids, watching them bounce and shout. When Santa leaned down and pointed at my nephew, the kid froze, smile draining from his face. "That's not him," my nephew whispered. "Not who?" I asked. "Santa," he said. "That's not Santa." I laughed it off, ruffled his hat, but when I looked back up, Santa's eyes were on me, not scanning the crowd, fixed. The fire truck rolled past, and the moment broke, but the unease stayed with me like a pebble in my boot. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, my sister and I sat at the kitchen table, wrapping paper piled around us. The radio murmured old songs. Around midnight, the power flickered and went out. We froze, listening. Outside, something moved on the roof. Not a thump, not a crash. A slow, deliberate drag like wood being pulled across shingles. My sister grabbed my arm. "Is that ice?" I wanted to say yes. Instead, I stood and crept to the window. The yard was white and empty, moonlight shining off the snow. The roof noise stopped. Then came a sound from the chimney, a scraping. A grunt, low and wet. I backed away as the fireplace flue rattled. Ash spilled out onto the hearth. Something inside shifted, metal against brick. My sister whispered my name. The sound grew louder, closer, until with a final crack, something dropped into the fireplace. We stared as a shape unfolded from the dark, taller than any man I knew, shoulders brushing the brick on either side. Ash coated a red suit, darker in places, stiff with something that wasn't soot. A beard hung in tangled clumps, yellowed and matted. The smell hit us then, rot and smoke and cold iron. It smiled. The smile was wrong. Too many teeth, too even, stretching back farther than a human jaw should. "Ho," it said, voice scraping like wind through dead leaves. "Ho." My sister screamed. I grabbed the poker and swung. It caught the thing in the shoulder, tearing fabric and flesh beneath. The smell intensified, sweet and rotten. It turned its head slowly toward me, eyes reflecting the firelight like an animal's. "Naughty," it said, and stepped forward. I don't remember everything that happened after. I remember heat, pain, my sister pulling the kids from their rooms and out into the snow. I remember the thing laughing, a deep, booming sound that shook the walls. By the time the fire department arrived, the house was burning. They found no body, no footprints in the snow except ours. The official report blamed a chimney fire and an intruder who fled. My sister moved away. I stayed. Because once you see something like that, it doesn't let you go. I started asking questions. Old-timers at the bar, librarians, anyone who might remember stories. Most laughed. A few went quiet. An elderly man named Earl, who'd worked the logging camps in the 1960s, finally told me what he knew. "Before there was Stillwater," he said, staring into his beer, "before the roads, there were men who went missing every winter. Loggers, trappers, they'd find the camps torn apart, food gone, bones stacked neat as cordwood." "What did they think it was?" I asked. Earl shrugged. "They called it Santa." I waited for him to laugh. He didn't. "Not the Santa you're thinking of," he said. "Something older. Came with the cold, took what it wanted, left gifts sometimes, things no one needed." He told me about a farmhouse in the 1930s where a family found a sack by the tree on Christmas morning. Inside were the bones of their eldest son, polished clean. He told me about sleigh bells heard miles from any road, about reindeer tracks that ended abruptly as if the animals had taken flight. "The churches tried to cover it up," Earl said, "turned it into a story for kids, made 'em jolly, made 'em safe. Why now?" I asked. "Why come back?" Earl looked at me then, eyes pale and sharp. He never left. The next year, I transferred to night shifts. I told myself it was for the pay differential, but the truth was I wanted to see it again. To understand. On December 24th, just before midnight, dispatch sent me to check a stalled vehicle near the old logging road off County 13. The snow was falling hard, flakes thick and heavy, swallowing sound. My headlights cut tunnels through the dark. When I reached the spot, there was no car. Instead, there were the tracks again. 2 long grooves, deep impressions between. Sleigh bells jingled softly from the trees. I should have turned around. I didn't. I followed the tracks into the woods, boots crunching, breath fogging. The trees closed in, branches heavy with snow. The bells grew louder, accompanied by a rhythmic snort, the sound of animals breathing hard. The clearing opened suddenly, and there it was. A sleigh made of bone and dark wood, carved with symbols that hurt to look at. 8 creatures stood harnessed to it, shapes like deer but wrong, too many joints, eyes glowing faintly blue. Steam rose from their bodies. And standing beside the sleigh was Santa. Up close, it was worse. Taller than before, its red suit stitched from different fabrics, some modern, some ancient. The beard was streaked with gray and black, clotted at the ends. Its eyes were pits of cold light. "You came back," it said, voice almost gentle. I tried to speak. My teeth chattered too hard. It stepped closer, and I saw what it held in its gloved hand. A list, not paper. Skin. Names were etched into it, cut deep. I saw my sister's name, my nephew's, mine. "You don't have to," I said. "Take me. Leave them." It tilted its head. "Always a bargain," it said. "That's the American way." It reached out, and for a moment, I thought it might accept. Then it laughed. "You already gave me something," it said. Images flooded my mind, the years of ignoring the cold, of paving over old roads, of cutting forests, of pretending the past was dead, the churches, the parades, the fire truck Santa. "Belief," it said. "You fed me." The reindeer stamped, impatient. I don't know how I escaped. I remember running, branches tearing at my clothes, the bells fading behind me. I remember collapsing in the snow and waking in the hospital with frostbite on my hands and feet. They said I'd been delirious, found miles from my truck. The logging road was gone, erased by new development. There were no tracks. Christmas came and went. No reports of break-ins, no missing persons. People said it was a quiet year. I quit the roads department, moved south, where winters are mild and snow is a novelty. I tried to forget, but every December I hear bells in my dreams. I smell smoke and rot. I wake with the taste of ash in my mouth. Last night, my phone buzzed with a news alert from Stillwater. A fire. A family displaced on Christmas Eve, 'cause under investigation. The photo showed a charred living room, a blackened fireplace, and in the corner, barely visible, a red hat dusted with ash. I turned off the phone and sat in the dark, listening. Somewhere far away, something laughed. Story the end. The first winter I worked nights for the county road department, I learned there were parts of rural America that never made it into postcards. The kind of places where Christmas lights flickered over rusted trailers, where the smell of pine mixed with diesel and old blood, where silence could be loud enough to hurt your ears. I was 27, recently divorced, sleeping in my childhood bedroom after my father's stroke, taking whatever shifts I could get to keep the lights on. Snowstorms meant overtime, and overtime meant food on the table. The call came in on December 22nd, just before midnight. A plow had gone off the road out near Cedar Hollow, a stretch of county land that barely deserved the name road. I knew it well enough to hate it. Cedar Hollow curved through dense woods, the trees leaning close like they were listening. Radios cut out there, phones lost signal. Locals joked it was a dead zone. They also joked that Santa lived back there. The joke was old, older than me, something about a man in red who came down from the hills every winter. I had always assumed it was about moonshiners or some hermit who dressed up to scare kids. I grabbed my coat, my boots still wet from the last shift, and drove out with a thermos of burnt coffee. The snow was thick, falling sideways, the kind that erased tire tracks as soon as they were made. My headlights tunneled through it, and beyond that was nothing but dark. I found the plow, tipped into a shallow ditch, engine still running, the driver gone. The door was open, snow piling onto the seat. I killed the engine and shouted his name. The woods swallowed my voice. I tried the radio. Static. I tried my phone. No service. That was when I saw the footprints. They came from the trees, deep and wide, the tread of heavy boots pressed into the fresh snow. They circled the plow once, then headed back into the woods. I followed them without thinking, the way you do when adrenaline is louder than fear. The footprints were oddly regular, like marching, each step the same distance apart. There were drag marks too, something heavy pulled behind. The woods were quiet in a way that felt deliberate. No wind in the branches. No animals. Just the crunch of my boots and my breath. The footprints led me to a clearing I had never seen before, despite growing up 10 miles away. In the center stood a cabin. It looked like a Christmas card that had been left out in the rain. Logs blackened with age, a steep roof sagging under snow, a single window glowing warm yellow. Smoke rose from the chimney, straight up, as if the air itself was holding its breath. And there, hanging from a beam over the porch, was a string of bells. They were old sleigh bells, the kind you see in antique shops, dull with tarnish. They didn't move. They didn't ring. They just hung there, waiting. I should have turned around. I know that now, but all I could think was that the missing driver might be inside, injured, and that every minute counted. I knocked. The sound seemed to vanish before it reached the door. I knocked again, harder. After a long moment, the door opened inward. A man filled the doorway. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a heavy red coat that looked handmade, stitched from thick wool and leather. White fur lined the cuffs and collar, yellowed with age. His beard was massive, spilling down his chest, streaked with gray and something darker. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, and they fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Merry Christmas," he said. His voice was deep, rough, like gravel poured over ice. I stammered something about the plow, about the missing driver. He listened without interrupting, his head tilted slightly, like a dog trying to understand a command. "He came," the man said when I finished, "just like he was supposed to." I asked what he meant. He smiled, and I saw that several of his teeth were capped in gold. The smile didn't reach his eyes. "Come in," he said. "It's cold." The warmth inside hit me like a wall. A fire roared in a massive stone hearth. The cabin was decorated floor to ceiling with Christmas things, but not the kind you'd find in a store. Ornaments carved from bone, garlands of dried berries, and something that looked uncomfortably like fingers. Stockings hung from the mantel, each one labeled with a name stitched in careful looping script. Some of the names were old, some were new. The smell was what got to me most. Pine, yes, and wood smoke. But underneath that was iron. Blood. I told him again about the missing driver. He nodded, as if I had confirmed something he already knew. "He's resting," the man said. "He'll be ready soon." I took a step back toward the door. The man's hand shot out faster than I expected, gripping my wrist. His fingers were strong, calloused. Pain flared. "You don't leave until the bells ring," he said softly. That was when I heard something from the back of the cabin. A muffled sound. A whimper. I yanked my arm free and bolted for the door. The bells over the porch finally rang, a harsh, discordant sound that scraped at my nerves. The man laughed, a booming, joyful sound that echoed through the trees. I ran until my lungs burned, until I tripped and fell face first into the snow. When I looked back, the cabin was gone. Just trees and darkness and falling snow. The footprints were gone too, smoothed over as if they had never been. They found the plow driver 2 days later, miles away, frozen solid, posed kneeling in the snow with his hands folded like he was praying. His beard had been shaved off. His boots were missing. I told the sheriff what I saw. He listened, stone-faced, then told me Cedar Hollow had been uninhabited for decades. No cabins, no hermits, no Santas. He suggested I get some rest. I quit the road department after that, moved back to town, tried to forget. It didn't work. The second time I saw him was 3 years later, when my father died. He had been sick for a long time, and by December he was barely there, his mind drifting in and out. Hospice set up a bed in the living room, right next to the old fireplace he used to decorate every Christmas. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell outside and the house creaked with cold, my father woke suddenly, eyes wide. "He's coming," he whispered. I told him it was okay, that everything was okay. He grabbed my hand with surprising strength. "Listen for the bells," he said. "If they ring, don't answer." I wanted to ask him what he meant, but he was already gone. That night, as I sat alone in the quiet house, I heard them. Faint at first, then louder. Bells. They came from the front porch. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to stay put. The bells rang again, insistent. I thought of my father's last words. I thought of the cabin, the gold teeth, the smell of blood. The knocking came next. Slow. Patient. I didn't answer. I sat in the dark and listened as the bells rang and rang until finally they stopped. In the morning, there were footprints in the snow leading up to the porch, heavy boot prints, and beside them, a single gift wrapped in brown paper and twine. I didn't open it. I burned it in the fireplace, watched the paper curl and blacken. The smell that rose from it was unmistakable. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The stories started to surface after that. Once I began asking questions, once I admitted to myself that what I had seen was real. Old newspaper clippings from the late 1800s about missing children found days later, bearded and barefoot, posed beneath trees. Oral histories from native elders about a winter spirit that wore red and demanded tribute. Police reports from the 1950s about a man in a Santa suit seen near scenes of disappearances, reports that were quietly dismissed or lost. Every story shared the same details. The gifts. The rule. He came every year. He took those who answered. He took those who wandered. He took those who were ready. The third time I encountered him was the worst, because it wasn't just me anymore. I had remarried by then. A woman named Claire, with a laugh that filled rooms and a stubborn belief that the world was more good than bad. She knew about my experiences, or at least the sanitized version. She didn't believe in monsters. She believed in people. We had a son, Matthew. He was 4 that Christmas, old enough to believe in Santa with his whole heart. We decorated the house, hung bells on the tree, baked cookies. I tried to keep my fear from showing, tried to tell myself that whatever haunted Cedar Hollow had no power here, in a neighborhood full of lights and laughter. On Christmas Eve, after Matthew went to bed, the snow started. Thick, heavy flakes that blanketed the world in white. The power flickered, then went out. Claire lit candles, kissed me, told me everything would be fine. That was when we heard the bells. They came from inside the house. From Matthew's room, I ran, heart in my throat. The door was open, the window was open, snow blowing in, and standing by the bed was the man in red. He looked exactly the same, ageless, unchanged. His eyes fixed on Matthew, who sat up in bed, eyes shining with wonder. Santa. Matthew breathed. I lunged, tackling the man with everything I had. It was like hitting a wall. He barely moved. He looked down at me, almost sadly. He invited me, he said. He rang the bells. I saw then the small brass bell in Matthew's hand, one I didn't remember buying. My son rang it again, uncertain, looking between us. The man smiled. The room went cold. The candles in the hallway guttered out. The smell of pine and blood filled the air. I screamed, grabbing Matthew, pulling him away. The man reached out, and his hand brushed my arm. The pain was indescribable, like frostbite and fire combined. I felt something leave me then, something warm and vital. Claire appeared in the doorway, holding a candle, her face contorted in fear. She saw the man. She saw the red coat, the beard, the eyes. She stepped forward. "Take me," she said. "Leave my son." The man considered her, head tilted. The bells began to ring, softly, all through the house. "A willing gift," he said. "That is rare." I begged. I screamed. Claire looked at me, tears streaming down her face, and smiled. "Merry Christmas," she whispered. The man took her hand. The bells rang once, loud enough to shatter the window. And then they were gone. The house was silent. Claire was never found. The police blamed a break-in, a kidnapping. There was no sign of forced entry, no footprints in the snow. Matthew stopped speaking for months. When he did, he never mentioned Santa again. I moved us away after that. Far away. I threw out every Christmas decoration. I refused to celebrate. Matthew grew up with a quiet sadness around the holidays, a gap where joy should have been. I carried guilt like a second skin. I thought distance would protect us. I thought time would dull the memory. It didn't. Matthew died last year in December, a car accident on an icy road. He was 22. The world went numb. On Christmas Eve, alone in my apartment, I heard the bells. They were soft, almost gentle. I didn't fight this time. I opened the door. He stood there, framed by falling snow, looking exactly as he always had. His beard was thicker now, streaked with fresh red. "You're ready," he said. I nodded. I stepped outside. The bells rang, clear and bright, and for the first time I felt something like peace. They will tell my story someday. They will laugh. They will say it's just a tale, a warning to children, a way to explain the dark. They will hang bells and tell their kids not to ring them after midnight. And every winter, when the snow falls just right and the world goes quiet, he will come. Listen for the bells. Story the end. The first snow of December had fallen early that year. coating the streets of Cedar Pines in a thick, muffled white, the kind of snow that made the world feel smaller, quieter, and somehow heavier. For 12-year-old Emily Larson, it should have been a perfect scene. Christmas lights twinkling along the streets, the scent of pine and cinnamon drifting from every home, neighbors greeting each other with warm smiles. But that Christmas was different. Something in the quiet, something in the way the shadows moved across the snow made the joy feel hollow. It started the evening of December 18th when Emily's mother, Claire, decided to take her and her younger brother, Sam, to the Cedar Pines Mall for a chance to meet Santa Claus. The mall was bustling, filled with the hum of holiday music and the soft, anxious chatter of children waiting for their turn. Emily had always loved Santa. He was supposed to be magic, kind, the person who brought joy without expecting anything in return. But the Santa at Cedar Pines Mall wasn't that Santa. He was tall, far taller than a regular man could be in the suit. His eyes, hidden beneath the thick red fabric and fake bushy brows, seemed too sharp, too black, and too cold. And his laugh, when he called out to the children, was too deep, too harsh. Emily waited in line with Sam, trying to shake the unease that had settled in her chest. When it was finally their turn, Santa's gaze fell on her first, lingering far too long, and Emily felt an odd tightening in her stomach. "What's your name, little girl?" he asked, his voice low and rumbling. "Emily," she whispered. "And what do you want for Christmas, Emily?" I don't know yet," she said, feeling the words catch in her throat. Santa leaned closer, the smell of something metallic and faintly decayed filling her nose. "Be careful what you wish for," he said. "Sometimes wishes don't come the way you expect." Emily blinked. He chuckled softly, but it wasn't the kind of laughter that brought warmth. It was a sound that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. Sam, oblivious, handed over his list and climbed onto Santa's lap without hesitation. The next moment felt surreal. Santa's hands rested on Sam's shoulders, and his grip was unnaturally strong. When Sam climbed down, he didn't smile. He looked pale, and when he whispered, "He smelled like dead things," Emily shivered. They left the mall quickly, but the unease stayed. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. Outside her window, the snow seemed to shimmer unnaturally, as though reflecting something more sinister than the streetlights. Then she heard it, a soft thumping, scraping along the roof, like heavy boots dragging over snow. She pulled the covers over her head, convinced it was just her imagination, until the sound grew louder, closer. The next day, news began to spread through Cedar Pines. Children reported strange dreams of Santa coming into their rooms at night, whispering their names. Toys would move on their own, rearranged in unsettling ways. Some kids claimed they had woken up to find candy scattered around the living room, but the candy was cold, brittle, and tasted wrong, like ashes and metal. Emily tried to ignore it, but her dreams became worse. Every night she would see that Santa again, emerging from the shadows of her room, looming over her bed. His face was closer than it should be, the black eyes boring into her mind. Sometimes he didn't speak. Sometimes he whispered, "You were warned." One evening, Claire noticed something was off. Emily's smile was gone, replaced by a tight, fearful line. Sam had begun to stutter and jump at shadows. That night, Claire heard strange noises coming from the fireplace, a deep, unnatural scraping, like nails against brick. She thought it was the wind until she saw it, a dark figure climbing out of the chimney. Its red suit was tattered, hanging in uneven strips, and the face, Claire couldn't make out a face, just two black holes where eyes should be. The figure didn't move, like a man. It glided, almost float-like, across the living room. Claire froze, her heart hammering in her chest. It stopped near Emily's bed and leaned down. A voice, wet and low, hissed, "The lists, all the lists, the naughty ones first." Then it was gone. After that night, the family tried to leave Cedar Pines, but something prevented them. Every attempt ended with car troubles, flat tires, inexplicably heavy snow blocking the roads, or the sense that someone was watching, just beyond sight. Even the authorities couldn't explain it. Reports of children disappearing or vanishing toys with strange markings became more common, yet the town didn't or couldn't intervene. Emily discovered the first clue herself. She had snuck into the attic, curious and terrified. Among dusty boxes and forgotten Christmas decorations, she found a collection of photographs. They were decades old, some in black and white, others faded. and every photograph had a man in a Santa suit, but the face never seemed right. In each, the eyes were always blacker than they should be, the smile just a bit too wide, too sharp. Emily noticed a pattern. The background of each photo showed children, sometimes dozens, and each time at least one child was missing from later photographs. When she showed the photos to Sam, he whispered, "He wants the lists. He wants us." Emily didn't understand at first until she found an old journal in one of the boxes. It belonged to a man named Harold Vance, who had once been the mall's Santa decades ago. He wrote about something that haunted him, a being that had appeared to him during a winter, telling him to take the naughty children. The journal described how the Santa he wore was more than a costume. It was a conduit for something ancient and hungry. Harold had resisted, but he wrote about the fear, the whispered promises, the dreams that wouldn't let him rest. And then the last entry, in shaky handwriting, "It is coming back. It remembers all the names." Emily's blood ran cold. The lists of what children wanted, what they had done wrong, all of it had been recorded. And now, somehow, this entity had returned. The night of December 23rd was when things escalated. Emily and Sam were awakened by the sound of jingling bells. Soft, melodic, yet distorted, as though the music itself was decaying. From the living room, shadows moved, twisting unnaturally. The children huddled together as the figure appeared again, crawling down the stairs. "I've been waiting," it said, voice wet and crackling, like old paper burning. Waiting for the lists, for the choices. Naughty, nice, meaningless. Emily realized that the lists weren't just about gifts. They were about judgment, about control. The Santa had come to claim what had been promised or taken over the decades. The children of Cedar Pines, it seemed, were not safe. Emily grabbed the journal and started reading aloud, desperately hoping to find some clue, some weakness. The words seemed to repel the figure slightly, as if the ink itself carried a memory of resistance. It shrieked, a sound that made the windows shake and the snow swirl violently outside. Emily read faster, voice cracking, until the last line, "Bind it with memory, for the remembering keeps it at bay." Suddenly, Emily remembered something. Her memories of Christmas past, the innocent joy, the warmth, the moments when she had believed in Santa not as a threat, but as a promise of wonder. She held tightly to those memories, reciting aloud the things she remembered most vividly. Decorating the tree with Sam, baking cookies with Claire, the laughter, the songs. The figure recoiled, twisting and writhing, the red fabric of the suit tearing away to reveal something dark, wriggling underneath. Emily continued, louder, refusing to stop. "We remember the real Santa. Not you. You're not him." Then, with a final guttural scream, the shadow collapsed inward as if the air itself swallowed it. The room went silent. For the first time in days, Emily and Sam could breathe. The snow outside settled, the cold retreating slightly as if the town itself exhaled. The family left Cedar Pines the next morning. The mall remained, bustling and cheerful, as if nothing had happened. Santa sat in his chair, smiling, inviting children to sit on his lap. But Emily knew better. She never looked at a Santa the same way again. Years later, she would tell the story to a friend, only for it to be dismissed as a childhood nightmare. But she remembered. Every year, as snow fell and Christmas lights blinked to life, she could feel it watching, waiting, remembering. And she knew, deep down, that if the memory faded, it could return. Even now, decades later, Emily still avoids malls in December. She never leaves cookies out for Santa. And when she closes her eyes at night, she whispers her memories aloud, keeping them alive, because she knows that memory is the only thing that keeps the shadow in the red suit from coming back. Story, the end. It started the winter I turned 10, the year my father lost his job at the paper mill. The snow came early that December, thick and heavy, the kind that makes the world white and quiet in a way that feels unnatural. Our house was on the edge of town, right where the forest began. Pine trees loomed over the yard, dark and skeletal against the snow, their branches scraping the windows when the wind blew. That was the year I first heard the bells. At first, I thought it was a car driving past or the wind catching something on the porch. But it kept happening every night. Slow, deep chimes like iron striking iron coming from somewhere out in the woods behind our house. They always started around midnight, just when the world was still and every other sound had gone to sleep. My father drank more that year, sitting by the fire in silence. My mother didn't talk much either. She hung wreaths and candles like she always did, but her hands shook while she worked. One night, I asked my father about the bells. He didn't answer at first, just stared at the fire. Then he said, "Don't go outside when you hear them. Don't open the door. And whatever you do, don't look." I didn't understand then. I thought he was just scaring me. But I remembered it when, that Christmas Eve, the power went out during a storm. The wind blew snow against the windows in sheets, and I could see nothing but white. That's when the bells started, louder than I'd ever heard, moving closer. I woke my parents. My father grabbed his old hunting rifle, shaking, and my mother clutched a crucifix she had hidden under the pillow. The door began to rattle. Slow knocks, 3 of them. Then a voice, deep and warm, almost kind, saying, "Merry Christmas." My father yelled at whoever it was to leave. My mother whispered something I didn't understand, her eyes wide with fear. The door swung open slowly, back, and a man filled the frame. He was enormous, dressed in a red coat lined with fur, boots caked in snow. His beard was white, long and tangled with streaks of gray. His eyes were pale, almost colorless, but they were alive in a way that made my blood run cold. "I've brought what you asked for," he said, and I noticed the sack over his shoulder. It was huge, dark, and seemed heavier than it should have been. He stepped inside like he belonged, boots leaving dark prints on the floor. My father raised the gun, shaking. "Get out!" he shouted. The man didn't move. He just smiled, showing teeth that were slightly yellowed with a few gold caps glinting in the candlelight. "He's ready," the man said softly. I didn't know who he meant. Suddenly, I heard a sound from the back of the house, a muffled whimper like someone crying for help. I froze. My father fired the gun. The blast echoed, splintering the door. When the smoke cleared, the man was gone. The sack remained on the floor, moving slightly, as if something inside was alive. The bells rang once more, faintly, and then the house fell silent. The next morning, the sack was gone. There was no sign it had ever been there. My parents didn't speak of it again, and the air in the house grew heavy with unspoken fear. Years later, I learned other families had similar experiences. People who lived in rural towns reported missing children around Christmas. Adults went missing too, often those who were isolated, alone, or forgotten. The authorities dismissed it as coincidence, frostbite, accidents. But the descriptions were always the same. A man in red, enormous, pale eyes, a sack, and the bells. When I was 16, my mother disappeared on Christmas Eve. She had gone to check the mailbox and never returned. The mailbox was tipped over, and there was a small bell lying in the snow. No footprints, no struggle, nothing to explain it. The police questioned me for hours, but I told them everything. They looked at me like I was insane, asked if I had ever seen a therapist. No one believed me. I left town soon after, moving first to Chicago, then to Ohio. I tried to live a normal life. I joined the army, thinking distance and discipline would protect me. I survived things overseas that should have killed me, but nothing scared me like December. The bells always followed. Even in a desert, I could hear them in my dreams, distant and patient. After I was discharged, I settled in a small town in Ohio. I worked nights at a storage facility, lived alone, and avoided Christmas entirely. I thought I was safe. That is, until Emily. She was a teacher, bright, kind, and stubborn. She loved Christmas. She decorated the apartment, hung lights, bought a small brass bell for the crib when our son, Daniel, was born in October. I threw it away. It came back the next day, sitting neatly on the dresser. On Christmas Eve, the power went out. Snow fell heavy and fast outside. I could feel my heart pound in my chest as the bells started. They came from inside the apartment. Daniel began to cry. I ran to the nursery. The window was open, snow blowing in. The bell lay on the floor, ringing softly on its own. From the living room came the sound of heavy footsteps, deliberate, confident. I grabbed a kitchen knife and stepped into the hallway. He was there, the man from my childhood. Taller than I remembered, broader, red coat stitched from different fabrics, some stained dark. His eyes glowed pale blue. "You didn't teach him the rules," he said gently. I lunged, knife in hand. It broke against his arm like it was paper. He lifted me effortlessly by the throat. "Your family owes," he said, "and now it's time to pay." Emily screamed from the bedroom. He turned, considering. "She'll do," he said, and just like that, he took her. The bells rang so loud they shattered the window. Then they were gone. Daniel was gone too. The police didn't believe me. They said it was a break-in, a kidnapping. No forced entry, no fingerprints. Nothing. I was broken. I drank, I screamed. I was committed twice. Doctors called it trauma-induced psychosis, seasonal delusions. But December always cut through. Last year, I returned to Minnesota, to the edge of the woods where it all started. The logging town was nearly abandoned. Cedar Hollow Road was barely visible beneath snow. I followed the bells deeper into the forest. They led me to a clearing I had never seen before. A workshop stood there, crooked, massive, with smoke pouring from chimneys made of bone. Sleighs rested against trees. Not one, but dozens. Inside, the sound was unbearable. Bells, hammers, and screams. Men in red coats worked endlessly, dragging heavy sacks, sharpening hooks, crafting toys from things that should not exist. At the center stood the oldest one, the first. His eyes were winter sky. He saw me and smiled. "You came home," he said. I asked what he was. He laughed. "We are what the cold demands. We bring balance. We take what would be taken anyway." I asked about Daniel. He pointed to a small figure, silent, eyes empty, a bell sewn into his sleeve. "He will ring for others as you once did." I fell to my knees, begging. The old Santa leaned close. "There is only one way to stop it," he said. He handed me a coat, red, heavy, warm. The bells rang. Now it is December again. I stand at the edge of a small town, bells at my waist, sack at my feet. I knock, I smile. "Merry Christmas." Story the end. I grew up in a town so small it barely registered on most maps, tucked into the pine forests of northern Minnesota where winter wasn't a season so much as a condition of life. Snow came early, stayed late, and swallowed sound until the world felt muffled and distant. People there trusted traditions more than people. If something had always been done a certain way, you didn't question it. You just did it. Every December, the biggest tradition was Santa. Not the mall version. Not the smiling red mascot you see in commercials. Our Santa was different. Older. Realer. He arrived every year on Christmas Eve, just after sunset, walking down Main Street with a burlap sack over his shoulder and a bell in his hand. The bell was deep-toned, not cheerful. It rang once every few steps, slow, heavy. Parents told us he was part of the town's heritage, a living piece of history. Kids were told to be good because Santa was watching. Adults smiled when they said it, but there was always something tight in their faces, something forced. I didn't notice it at first. When you grow up with something, you don't question it. You accept it the way you accept cold air burning your lungs or ice cracking under your boots. I was 8 the first year I really saw him. I remember standing at the frost-laced window of our house, my breath fogging the glass, when the bell rang outside. One slow toll, then another. The sound carried through walls, through bone. My mother stiffened behind me. "Get away from the window," she said. "But I want to see Santa," I told her. She grabbed my shoulders harder than necessary and pulled me back. Her hands were shaking. "You don't look at him," she said. "You listen, you stay still, and you don't make a sound." Outside, the bell rang again. Closer. My father stood in the doorway to the living room, his face pale, his jaw clenched. He nodded once like he was bracing himself. The bell stopped. Then came the footsteps, heavy boots crunching on snow. Slow, deliberate. They stopped right in front of our house. I could hear breathing through the door, deep and labored, like a man who had walked a very long way. There was a knock, not loud, not aggressive, just one firm rap. My father opened the door. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of smoke and pine, and something else I didn't recognize then. Metal, maybe. Blood, years later I would realize. Santa stood on our porch. He was enormous, taller than my father, broader than any man I'd ever seen. His suit wasn't bright red, but dark, almost brown in places. The fur trim yellowed and matted. His beard was thick and uneven, crusted with ice near the bottom. His eyes were pale, reflecting the porch light like an animal's. He didn't smile. He looked past my father and straight at me. "Is the child good?" he asked. His voice was low and rough, like stones grinding together. My father swallowed. "Yes," he said. "He's been good." Santa's gaze stayed on me. I couldn't move. I couldn't blink. "Good," he said after a moment. He reached into his sack and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. He handed it to my father, then rang his bell once. The sound vibrated through my chest. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the falling snow. My parents closed the door and locked it. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The gift was a wooden toy truck, hand-carved. Heavy, it smelled faintly of smoke. I loved it. For years, that was all Santa was to me, a strange man who came once a year, something to fear, but also something that brought gifts. That's how it starts. That's how it starts, I guess. You're taught to accept contradictions. It wasn't until I was older that I noticed the other things, like how some houses never got visited. The Peterson place at the edge of town was one of them. Mr. Peterson drank. Everyone knew it. He hit his wife. Sometimes you could hear her crying from the street. Every Christmas Eve, Santa walked right past their house without stopping. One year, the Petersons' house burned down on Christmas morning. Faulty heater, they said. Mr. Peterson didn't make it out. No one mentioned Santa. When I was 12, a kid named Ryan went missing. He'd been a bully, cruel in a quiet way, pushing smaller kids into snowbanks, breaking things and blaming others. On Christmas Eve, his parents waited all night for Santa's bell. It never came. Ryan was found in the woods in the spring, frozen, his body twisted, his boots filled with ash. People whispered, but never too loudly. He wasn't good, someone said once. By the time I was 16, I understood the rule without anyone ever explaining it. Santa didn't reward good children. He judged families, and judgment came in many forms. I left town when I turned 18, joined the army. Saw things overseas that should have erased any lingering superstition. War hardens you, makes monsters feel human. But every Christmas Eve, no matter where I was, I heard bells in my dreams. I came back when my mother died. Cancer, slow and merciless. My father was already gone, heart attack a few years earlier. I inherited the house, the memories, and the weight of a town that hadn't changed. They were glad to see me. Too glad. You'll take part this year. The mayor said when I ran into him at the grocery store. It's time. Take part in what? I asked. He smiled thinly. You know, I did know. I just didn't want to admit it. That night, I found the suit in the basement. It was hidden behind old furniture, wrapped in a tarp, yellowed with age. When I pulled it free, the smell hit me hard. Smoke, sweat, old iron. The same smell I remembered from childhood. My father had been Santa. My hands shook as I touched the fabric. It was heavy, far heavier than it should have been. The bell lay beside it, dark and dull. There was a journal tucked into the folds of the suit. I sat on the basement steps and opened it. The entries were sparse. Dates, names, short notes. Johnson family, spared. Peterson warned twice. Ryan K. marked. My stomach turned as I read. This wasn't tradition. This was a ledger. The last entry was dated the year my father died. Passing it on. I didn't sleep that night. On Christmas Eve, the town gathered like always. Lights glowed in windows. Snow fell thick and steady. The mayor knocked on my door just after sunset. It's time, he said. I'm not doing it, I told him. His smile vanished. You don't have a choice. I'm leaving, I said, tonight. He stepped closer. You can't. The bell rang. Not outside. Inside my head. Pressure built behind my eyes, images flooding in, chimneys, rooftops, firelight. My hands moved on their own, pulling the suit from the basement, that slipping into it like it had been waiting for me. The wool burned against my skin, then went numb. The beard fused to my face. My reflection in the mirror warped, stretched. I screamed, but it came out as laughter. Outside, the bell rang again. I walked. Down Main Street, past houses glowing warm and safe, past others dark and silent. The bell guided me, pulling me toward certain doors, away from others. I understood then. This wasn't punishment. It was balance. Fear made people behave. Tradition kept them in line. At one house I stopped. I saw things I didn't want to see. Heard cries through walls. I rang the bell once. Fire followed. By dawn, it was over. I woke up in the snow at the edge of town, naked and burned, my body screaming in pain. Sirens wailed. Smoke rose in the distance. 3 houses were gone. 2 people dead. The town mourned quietly. No one accused me. They knew. I left again after that. Changed my name. Moved south where snow doesn't fall and Christmas feels like a joke. But every year, on Christmas Eve, I feel it. The weight, the pull, the bell ringing somewhere deep inside me. And I know that one year, sooner or later, I won't be able to resist. Because Santa Claus is real. And once you wear the suit, it never truly comes off. Story. The end. I never believed the phrase true story meant anything when it came to Santa Claus. It sounded like clickbait, like something desperate people used to make nonsense feel important. I was a practical person, raised in Missouri by parents who worked too much and trusted facts more than feelings. Christmas to us was about routine. Tree on December 1st, lights on the house, presents wrapped after the kids went to bed. Santa was a character, a tradition, a harmless lie. That belief lasted until the winter of 1998, when I was 29 years old and living in a small town called Alder Creek, tucked into the Ozarks where the woods press close and the nights get quiet enough to hear your own blood moving. I was a volunteer firefighter back then, newly married, no kids yet. My wife, Claire, loved Christmas more than anyone I knew. She decorated the house until it looked like a department store window. Wreaths, stockings, candles, porcelain Santas collected from thrift shops and antique stores. She liked the old ones best, the ones with chipped paint and strange expressions. Real history, she'd say, brushing dust off a cracked red coat. Not the plastic junk. The first call came on December 14th. A house fire on Mill Road, just past the old quarry. The Walker family. I remember the snow had just started falling, thick and wet, clinging to the windshield. When we arrived, the house was already engulfed. Flames poured from the roof like something alive and angry. But what stuck with me wasn't the fire. It was the silence. No screaming, no running figures. Just fire and snow and the sound of wood collapsing inward. We found the parents near the fireplace after the flames were under control. They were already dead before the fire started. Throats crushed. Not cut. Crushed. The coroner would later say it took incredible force. Their 6-year-old son, Evan, was missing. At the time, we assumed abduction. Tragic, but familiar enough to fit into the world we understood. Then we noticed the chimney. The brickwork had collapsed inward, as if something massive had come down through it. The soot pattern didn't match a normal fire. It looked smeared, dragged. One of the older firefighters, Hank Miller, stared at it longer than the rest of us. He'd been on the force since the 70s, a quiet man with hands like tree roots. "Not again," he muttered. When I asked him what he meant, he told me to shut up and get back to work. Evan Walker was found 2 days later, wandering along the edge of the woods near the county line. Barefoot. No injuries, no frostbite. He was wearing a red wool coat that didn't belong to anyone in his family. When the deputy asked where he'd been, Evan said, "Helping Santa." People laughed nervously when they heard that, said kids cope in strange ways. The official report labeled it trauma-induced fantasy. But Evan's parents were buried 3 days before Christmas, and the town felt different after that. Quieter. Like everyone was holding their breath without realizing it. The second incident happened on December 17th. This time it wasn't a fire. It was the Collins family, out by Bear Hollow. Neighbors called it in after noticing their Christmas lights still on at 3 a.m, blinking cheerfully against the snow. When deputies entered the house, they found the parents dead in their beds. Same injuries, same lack of struggle. Their daughter Lily, age 9, was gone. The chimney was intact this time, but the fireplace bricks were cracked and bowed inward. Ash coated the living room floor, forming deep impressions like footprints. Boot prints. Huge ones. That night, Claire asked me why I was so quiet. I told her about the calls, about the kids. I didn't mention the chimneys or the footprints. She touched one of her porcelain Santas absently, straightening it on the shelf. "You know," she said, "the original Santa stories weren't nice. He punished bad children." I snapped at her without meaning to. Told her I didn't want to hear folklore right now. She looked hurt, but she dropped it. On December 20th, the bells started. At first, it was just rumors. Someone heard jingling outside their window. Someone else swore they saw a shadow moving across their roof. The local radio host joked about Santa doing practice runs. Then a man named Robert Klein called 911 in a panic, saying someone was on his roof. "I hear him walking," he said. "He's heavy. Jesus, he's so heavy." The call cut off abruptly. When deputies arrived, they found the front door torn off its hinges. Klein was alive but unconscious, stuffed into a coat closet like discarded luggage. His wife was dead. Their 2 children were gone. That's when the sheriff called a town meeting. He didn't say Santa, he said unknown suspect. He said stay indoors, he said lock your doors and windows. What he didn't say was why every affected house had been decorated early, why every missing child had written a letter to Santa within the last week, why some of those letters, according to frantic parents, had gone missing. Claire showed me Michael's letter that night. We didn't have kids. Michael was her nephew, staying with us temporarily while her sister went through rehab. He was 7, quiet, deeply polite, the kind of kid adults describe as good. The letter was addressed carefully, written in pencil. Dear Santa, I have been very good. I listen. I help. I don't complain. I will keep being good. There was no list of presents, only obedience. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. That night I couldn't sleep. Around 1:30 a.m. I heard something outside. Bells. Not the cheerful sound from sleigh rides or music boxes. These were slow, measured, each ring spaced apart like footsteps. I crept to the window and parted the curtain. Something stood at the edge of our yard just beyond the porch light. Tall, broad, wrapped in red so dark it almost looked brown. Snow fell around it but didn't seem to touch it. Bells hung from its belt, swaying gently. It looked up. I dropped the curtain and staggered back like I'd been punched. When I worked up the nerve to look again, it was gone. The snow beneath the porch light was untouched. The next morning, Michael asked if Santa was mad at him. I asked why he'd think that. He watches, Michael said. He writes things down. I hear him at night. I told Claire we needed to leave town. Pack up, take Michael and go to her parents' place in Kansas, she argued. Said I was letting stress get to me. Said we couldn't uproot our lives over rumors and fear. On December 22nd, Hank Miller was found dead in his truck at the fire station. His throat was crushed. Pinned to the dashboard with a railroad spike was a scrap of red cloth, thick and coarse, trimmed with gray fur. That was when I knew we were past the point of reason. I went to the station after hours and broke into the old records room. Hank had mentioned once that Alder Creek had seen this before. I wanted to know when. The files went back to the late 1800s. I found references to a winter man, a red father, a thing that came when winters were hard and children were many and discipline was strict. The reports described him as a judge, an enforcer, a collector. One account from 1903 chilled me more than the rest. He comes down the hearth when invited. He takes what is owed. He leaves gifts of silence and obedience. Christmas Eve arrived with a blizzard. The town lost power before sunset. Phones went dead. Roads vanished under snowdrifts. We huddled in our living room with candles and a battery radio that crackled with static. At 9:47 p.m., the bells began ringing outside our house. Claire grabbed my arm. Michael went pale, eyes wide but calm, like he'd been expecting this. There was a knock. One. Heavy. Slow. The doorframe shuddered. A voice followed, deep and warm and ancient. Michael, it said, you have done well. I told Claire to take Michael and hide in the bathroom. She didn't argue this time. I grabbed my shotgun and stood in the hallway, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The door exploded inward under a single blow. He stepped inside, ducking slightly, taller than the doorframe. His coat was matted and stained. His beard hung thick and tangled, stiff with something dark. His eyes were black, reflecting candlelight like oil. He smelled like smoke and cold and old blood. I fired. The blast tore into his chest. He looked down at the holes, then back at me, mildly curious. Discipline requires sacrifice, he said. He moved faster than anything that size should be able to move. The shotgun flew from my hands. I hit the wall hard enough to see stars. I heard Claire scream. I heard bells moving through the house, slow and deliberate. By the time I dragged myself to the bathroom, the door was splintered. The room was empty. Michael was gone. Claire lay on the floor, alive but broken in a way that would never fully heal. Michael came back 2 days later. He walked out of the woods at dawn, wearing a red coat that dragged on the ground behind him. He was calm, polite, smiling. He said I was very good, Michael told me. He said he'll come back if I ever stop being good. We left Alder Creek the next day. It didn't matter. Every December since, the bells come back. Sometimes close, sometimes far away. Michael never misbehaves, never raises his voice, never breaks rules, and every Christmas Eve he sets a plate of food by the fireplace we no longer use, just in case. I don't believe in Santa Claus. I survived him. Story the end. I never wanted to talk about what happened in Coldwater, Ohio, because saying it out loud makes it feel less contained, like it might spread. But people keep asking why I moved, why I don't decorate for Christmas anymore, why I flinch when I hear bells. So I'm writing it down the way it happened, the way it still feels in my bones. This is as close to the truth as words will get. Coldwater was the kind of town where nothing ever really changed. One main street. A grain elevator. 2 churches that faced each other like rivals who'd learned to coexist. Christmas there wasn't just a holiday, it was a season-long performance. Every storefront had lights, every lawn had plastic reindeer, and every December, without fail, Santa Claus arrived. Not a mall Santa, not a rotating volunteer. The same Santa. His name was Raymond Harker, though almost no one called him that. He was just Santa. He'd been Santa longer than I'd been alive. He had the beard for it, thick and white, and a deep voice that sounded like it came from somewhere under the ground. He lived on the edge of town in an old farmhouse and drove a red pickup truck with rusted fenders. People said he'd been a mechanic once, maybe a trucker. No one really knew. No one needed to. Raymond Santa showed up everywhere in December. School assemblies, nursing homes, the tree lighting ceremony. He rang the bell outside the hardware store for charity, even when the temperature dropped below zero. Kids adored him. Parents trusted him. He never rushed, never broke character. He remembered names from year to year. He remembered details. That should have been the first warning. I was 9 when I first sat on his lap. It was at the fire hall during the annual Christmas party. My mom stood nearby with her camera. Santa smelled like peppermint and oil, like a garage dressed up for the holidays. His suit felt stiff, not soft, and his gloves were thin, the leather worn smooth. "What do you want for Christmas?" he asked. I told him a bike. He nodded, like he'd already known. "You been good?" he asked. I hesitated. Kids always do. He leaned closer, his beard brushing my ear. "I know when children lie," he whispered, "and I know when they don't." I laughed nervously. My mom snapped the photo. Santa smiled big for the camera, then his hand squeezed my knee, hard enough to hurt, just once. A warning. A punctuation mark. That night, I dreamed I was outside in the snow, barefoot, following a trail of bells into the woods. Nothing happened to me. Not then. Not ever. Directly. That's part of what makes this harder. It was never me. It was always someone else. The first disappearance I remember was Tommy Keller. He was 6, lived 3 streets over. He went missing on December 22nd, walking home from his aunt's house before dark. The search lasted days. Dogs, volunteers, helicopters. They found his hat by the river, frozen into the ice. The sheriff said he must have fallen in. The river was shallow there. They never found a body. At Tommy's vigil, Santa stood at the back, hat off, head bowed. People hugged him. He cried with the rest of them. After that, it became a pattern, though no one wanted to see it that way. Every few years, always in December, a child would disappear or turn up dead under strange circumstances. A girl found frozen in a cornfield. A boy hit by a train late at night. Another who wandered into the woods and never came back. Accidents, they said. Tragedies. Bad luck. Raymond Santa attended every funeral. When I was 15, I started volunteering at the community center to get out of the house. That December, they asked me to help organize the Santa photo line. I stood near the door to the storage room they used as his changing area, clipboard in hand. Between kids, Santa would duck back there alone. No helpers, no elves, just him and his bag. One evening, a little girl named Bethany didn't come back out right away. Her mother frowned, peered toward the door. A minute passed, then 2. I knocked, pretending I needed Santa to hurry. There was a pause. Then Santa's voice, cheerful as ever. "Just a moment." The door opened. Bethany stepped out, eyes unfocused, cheeks flushed. Santa followed, adjusting his belt. Bethany walked straight past her mother without a word. That night I told myself I was imagining things. Teenagers do that. We see monsters everywhere. Bethany disappeared 2 days later. Her parents never accused Santa. No one did. The police questioned him, briefly. He said he'd last seen her at the community center, smiling, happy. Other people backed him up. Photos existed. Evidence of joy. The case went cold. Years passed. I left for college, then came back. Cold water pulls people back. Jobs are scarce elsewhere when you grow up with nothing. I took a position at the local newspaper, part-time, mostly obituaries and school events. Raymond Santa was older by then, slower, but still Santa. One afternoon, while archiving old photos for a holiday retrospective, I noticed something. In nearly every picture of Santa with children, his eyes weren't on the camera. They were on the child. Studying, measuring. I started digging. Old police reports, missing persons, death certificates. I made a list. The dates clustered around Christmas. The ages were similar. The locations fell within a 30-mile radius, and every single child had interacted with Santa shortly before something happened. I brought it to my editor. He laughed gently, the way people do when they don't want to be unkind. "You're chasing ghosts," he said. Raymond's a town treasure. That night, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper. Be careful what stories you tell. No signature, just block letters. The following week, Raymond Santa invited me to his house. He called the office directly, asked for me by name. His voice sounded the same as ever. I've heard you've been asking questions, he said. Thought we should talk. Every instinct told me not to go. I went anyway. His farmhouse was neat, warm, Christmas decorations everywhere, not tacky, just thorough. Every surface had something festive. Every room smelled faintly of pine. We sat at his kitchen table. He poured coffee. You know why people trust Santa? He asked. I shook my head. Because Santa is supposed to see everything, he said. He watches, judges, keeps order. I said nothing. Children need that, he continued. Someone to make sense of the world, to reward the good, to deal with the bad. My stomach turned. Accidents happen, he said, smiling softly. But stories can hurt people. When I left, my car wouldn't start. He stood on the porch, watching as I struggled. Finally, it turned over. When I looked back, he was gone. That December, 2 things happened. First, the town council announced Raymond would be retiring as Santa. Age, they said. Health. They planned a big farewell at the Christmas Eve parade. Second, a boy named Lucas vanished. Lucas was 10. His parents worked late. He was supposed to walk home with friends. He never made it. The search was frantic. This time, people whispered. This time, patterns were noticed. Raymond Santa was questioned again, harder this time. He cooperated fully. He had alibis. He always did. On Christmas Eve, the parade went ahead anyway. Santa rode through town, waving. People clapped. It felt like a funeral disguised as a celebration. That night, a fire broke out at Raymond's farmhouse. By the time firefighters arrived, it was fully engulfed. He was inside. They said it was faulty wiring. Old house, old man. In the ashes, they found bones. Not just his. The town imploded. Investigators uncovered a crawl space beneath the house. Inside were boxes, clothing, photographs, hair tied with ribbon, names carved into the wood beams, some faded, some fresh, decades of evidence. National news descended. People who defended him went silent. Survivors came forward, shaking, furious, relieved. Coldwater canceled Christmas the following year. No decorations, no parade, no Santa. I thought it was over. It wasn't. The first sign was small. A neighbor found boot prints on her roof on December 23rd. The prints were large, deep. They led to the chimney, and then nowhere. Then a child claimed Santa had visited her, even though her parents hadn't hired one. She described his suit perfectly. Too perfectly. Another disappearance followed. Then another. The police insisted it was coincidence. Copycats. Trauma echoing itself. But I knew better. One night, as I worked late at the office, I heard bells outside. Slow, heavy. I looked out the window. Across the street, under the streetlight, stood Santa Claus. The suit was darker now, older, burned in places. The beard was singed. His face was wrong, half-shadowed, eyes bright with something like satisfaction. He looked up and met my gaze. He tipped his hat. I locked myself in the bathroom and called the police. When they arrived, there was nothing there, just snow and a single footprint pressed deep into the ground. I left Coldwater 2 days later. I didn't pack much. I didn't say goodbye. Every December since, I watch the news. I see reports from other towns, other states, similar stories, different names, Santa sightings, disappearances, fires, accidents. People say Santa isn't real. They're wrong. Santa is a role people are willing to fill, a mask that gives permission, a tradition that hides its teeth behind a smile. And once someone wears it long enough, it doesn't come off. Story the end. The winter I stopped believing in coincidences began the same way every other winter had in Pine Ridge, Colorado, with snow that came early and stayed late, with lights strung across Main Street, and with Santa Claus waving from the back of a borrowed fire engine. I had lived in Pine Ridge my entire life, 34 years by then, long enough to know that nothing ever really changed. We had one grocery store, one high school, one bar that doubled as a diner, and a handful of churches whose bells rang so often you stopped noticing. Christmas was the closest thing the town had to a shared religion. My father used to play Santa. He did it for almost 15 years, from the time I was 9 until the winter before he died. He had the right build for it, broad-shouldered and soft around the middle, and a voice that carried warmth even when he was scolding you. Kids loved him. Adults trusted him. He took the job seriously, memorizing names, parents' occupations, pets. He said Santa worked best when people felt seen. After he passed, the role went to others. Some were better than most. None were him. The year everything happened, the town hired a man named Everett Cole. Everett came from out of state, Nebraska, he said, though he never specified where. He arrived in Pine Ridge in early November before the ground froze solid, driving a faded green pickup with out-of-date plates. He applied for the Santa job at the town council meeting, standing awkwardly in front of the folding tables while the mayor squinted at his paperwork. "I've done this before," Everett said. "Community events, hospitals, malls." He smiled a lot, but his eyes stayed still. He got the job because no one else wanted it. The old volunteers had either moved away or died, and the younger parents were too busy or too self-conscious to put on the suit. Everett was grateful. Almost too grateful. He shook hands too long, thanked people twice. I noticed him first at Miller's Diner. I was sitting in a booth with my friend Callie, drinking coffee that tasted burned no matter how many creamers you added. Everett slid into the booth behind us without asking, close enough that I could hear him breathing. "Cold winter coming," he said. Callie glanced back, polite smile ready. "That's winter." Everett chuckled softly. "This one will be different." I turned around then. He had a thin face, sharp nose, and a scar that ran from his ear to his jaw like something had tried to peel his skin away. He wore gloves even inside, black knit ones with frayed fingers. "You knew?" I asked. "Knew enough," he said. "You lived here long?" "All my life." He nodded, satisfied, like that answer meant something important. "Then you know who's been naughty." The word landed wrong. Callie laughed it off, tossing a napkin at him. Everett smiled again, wide and toothy, and stood. "See you around," he said. "Christmas is coming." By December 1st, Everett was everywhere. He showed up at the elementary school for reading hour, sitting cross-legged on the floor with the kids clustered around him, his voice deep and soothing. He visited the nursing home, holding hands with residents who barely remembered their own names. He rang a bell outside the grocery store, collecting donations with a patience that bordered on devotion. People warmed to him. They always do. The suit helped. It was old-fashioned, heavy red wool trimmed with real fur. The beard looked authentic, thick and white, braided at the ends. When Everett put it on, he became someone else entirely. Kinder. Larger. He laughed often, a booming sound that echoed off storefront windows, but there were cracks. My niece Hannah was 6 that year. She sat on Santa's lap at the holiday market while my sister took pictures. I watched from a few feet away, arms crossed, feeling something tight in my chest I couldn't name. "What do you want for Christmas?" Everett asked her. Hannah leaned close, whispering. Everett listened, nodding solemnly. "I can do that," he said. "But you need to be good. All the time." "I am," Hannah said quickly. Everett's smile thinned. "I know what happens when you're not." Hannah stiffened. Her eyes flicked toward me. Everett followed her gaze, meeting my eyes through the beard. He winked. That night, Hannah wet the bed for the first time in over a year. She told my sister she'd dreamed Santa was standing in her room, watching her sleep, counting on his fingers. The first death happened on December 8th. It was ruled an accident. A man named Rick Doolin, who drank too much and yelled at his kids, slipped on ice behind his house and cracked his skull. The police said he probably didn't feel a thing. His wife cried on the evening news, wrapped in a blanket, thanking the town for their support. Someone left a small wrapped gift on their porch that night. Inside was a lump of coal tied with red ribbon. More followed. A teenage boy went missing after sneaking out past curfew. A woman was found in her car, frozen, engine still running, the radio tuned to Christmas music. An old man hanged himself in his garage, a note pinned to his chest with a candy cane. Each time, there was a gift. The police started noticing patterns. The town started whispering. Everett kept smiling. I tried to talk to him once after a tree lighting ceremony. He stood alone by the fire truck, helmet tucked under his arm, snow dusting his shoulders. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Of course," he said. "Why Pine Ridge?" He considered that. "Some places need me more than others." "That's not an answer." He leaned closer. I smelled pine and something metallic beneath it. "You ever notice how people are nicer when they think someone's watching?" I swallowed. "People are nice when they choose to be." Everett laughed softly. "That's what they tell themselves." On December 15th, the town council met in emergency session. They didn't invite Ed Everett. They debated canceling public events, hiring private security, asking the state for help. No one wanted to say the obvious out loud. Santa Claus was connected to the deaths. That night, the power went out across Pine Ridge. Snow fell thick and fast, blanketing the roads, silencing the world. Cell service dropped to nothing. The town was suddenly very small and very dark. I was at home, alone, when I heard the bells. They were faint at first, carried on the wind. I told myself it was wind chimes, imagination, nerves. Then they grew louder, closer, stopping just outside my door. A knock followed. Slow. Deliberate. I didn't answer. "Emily," a voice called. "I know you're home." My blood ran cold. I hadn't told Everett my name. Another knock. Harder. "I just want to talk." I grabbed my phone, useless without signal, and the fireplace poker from beside the hearth. The doorknob turned. I hadn't locked it. I always locked it. I didn't remember not locking it. The door opened. Everett stepped inside, filling the frame, red suit bright against the dark. Snow swirled around his boots, melting into nothing as soon as it touched the floor. "You should lock your doors," he said gently. "What do you want?" I demanded. "To thank you." "For what?" "For watching. You see things others don't." I backed away, poker raised. "Get out." He sighed, a sound like wind through dead branches. Your father understood." My grip faltered. "You didn't know my father." "Oh, but I did," Everett said. He reached up and pulled off the beard. The face beneath was not his own. It was my father's, older, thinner, eyes hollowed out, skin stretched tight. His mouth opened, and when he spoke, his voice layered over Everett's, two sounds in one. He wore the suit, the thing said. He carried the weight. Then he died. Someone had to take his place. My knees hit the floor. "That's not him," I whispered. The thing smiled. "Belief doesn't die, it transfers." Images flooded my mind. My father alone in the garage, trying on the suit one last time. Children's faces lit with wonder. Lists written and rewritten. Names marked and crossed out. A promise made to something old and hungry that lived in the spaces between traditions. "Santa isn't a man," the thing said. "It's a role, a judge, a balance." I screamed and swung the poker. It passed through the thing's head like smoke, frosting over with ice. The room grew unbearably cold. Frost crept up the walls, across the windows. Outside I heard other sounds, screams, bells, laughter echoing through the streets. "Tonight," the thing said, "the list is long." I don't remember escaping. I remember running through snow that didn't slow me down, lights flaring and exploding, figures in red moving through the dark. I remember collapsing on the steps of the church as dawn broke, the storm lifting as suddenly as it had come. They never found Everett Cole. They said the deaths were tragedies, freak accidents, the result of weather and stress. They said Pine Ridge would heal. The town still celebrates Christmas. They always will. But they don't have a Santa anymore. Parents tell their kids he's too busy, too far away. Sometimes late at night in December, I hear bells. Sometimes I see my reflection in dark windows, and for a moment, I'm wearing red. Story the end. The snow started falling earlier than usual that year, blanketing the streets of Cedar Falls, Iowa, with a thickness that made the world feel muffled and unreal. I had been working as a patrol officer for nearly 6 years, but nothing about that winter felt ordinary. Calls about prowlers, domestic disputes, and car accidents came in with the same frequency as always, but there was something else creeping through the edges of the town, something people weren't saying out loud. It began on December 14th, late at night. I had just finished my shift and was driving home when dispatch cut in with a welfare check call. The address was on the outskirts of town, a small farmhouse set back from the main road, framed by old pines that bent under the weight of snow. The neighbor reported he hadn't seen or heard from the family for 3 days. When I pulled up, I noticed immediately that the driveway had no tire tracks. Snow covered everything evenly, except for a set of footprints that led from the edge of the tree line directly to the front porch. They were unusually large, disproportionately so for a grown man, and heavy, like the snow had been pressed down with immense weight. I knocked and announced myself, but there was no answer. The door was unlocked. Inside, the house smelled of pine, cinnamon, and something coppery like blood. The living room was immaculate. A tree stood perfectly decorated in the corner. Stockings were hung, gifts placed neatly underneath, and then I saw them. Mr. and Mrs. Carver were seated in their recliners, eyes wide open, expressions frozen in shock. Their throats had been crushed, cleanly, deliberately, and yet there was no blood on the carpet, no signs of struggle. It was as if someone had known exactly how to take them without a fight. The children, Lucy and Tommy, were gone. I called dispatch immediately, and the area was swarming with deputies within the hour. The house showed no signs of forced entry other than the front door, which had only a small crack where I had pushed it. The only other anomaly was the fireplace. The bricks were cracked, some dislodged slightly, but there was no soot pattern consistent with a fire. Something heavy had come down through it. 3 days later, Lucy was found wandering along a snow-covered creek, barefoot, wearing a coat that didn't belong to her. She was unharmed physically, but when asked where she had been, she whispered, "Santa took me." At first, we thought it was trauma talking, a child misinterpreting events in the only way she could. But her father and mother weren't alive to explain anything. And then more reports began to surface. Families with young children, houses decorated early, chimneys damaged or oddly clean despite fireplaces being cold. Children missing for hours, sometimes days, always returned unharmed physically, but their behavior shifted. Quiet, overly obedient, eerily calm. And every time, the parents were gone. By the end of the month, we had a full-blown panic in Cedar Falls. The local news reported a string of unexplained disappearances, but no one publicly connected them. Privately, the sheriff called a meeting for law enforcement and town officials. He spoke of patterns going back over a century, citing old police reports and newspaper clippings from around the Midwest. Children abducted, adults killed, homes left immaculate, chimneys strangely damaged. There was always a figure described in red, moving silently, leaving bells ringing in its wake. I didn't believe it, not fully. I was a cop. I dealt in facts, in reports, evidence. But the files told a story I couldn't ignore. 2 years later, I had moved to northern Wisconsin with my wife, Claire, and our daughter, Emily. She was 7 that year, bright, polite, and deeply curious about the world. Claire decorated the house as if we were opening a store. Every surface covered in garlands, lights, and figurines, many of them old and chipped. Emily wrote her letter to Santa meticulously, listing her good deeds rather than gifts. On December 10th, a thick envelope appeared on the kitchen counter. No stamp, no return address. Just Emily's name in neat red handwriting. Inside was a short note. "I see you. Keep being good. I will visit soon." I asked Claire if she had left it there. She hadn't. Emily insisted she hadn't seen anyone. My stomach sank. I tried to tell myself it was a prank, maybe some neighbor trying to scare us. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. That night, Emily told me she heard bells outside her window, slow, deliberate, heavy, footsteps on the roof, breathing, steady and patient. I told her it was nothing, that the wind was making noises, that she had a vivid imagination. She nodded, accepting my explanation, but I couldn't shake the unease. On December 17th, the Henderson family, about 20 miles away, was found dead. 2 parents, 1 teenager. The teenage son was missing. Reports mirrored what I had read years ago. Parents dead in their beds, throats crushed, no struggle, no forced entry, chimney bricks dislodged, fireplace undisturbed. The town went quiet after that. Windows stayed shut. Roofs were inspected obsessively. Children were kept inside. But Emily insisted on leaving a small bell by her bedroom window that night. She said it was to let Santa know she was ready. I didn't sleep. Every shadow in the house felt like it moved, every creak a warning. At 11:47 p.m., the bells started. Faint at first, like wind chimes, then closer, heavier, deliberate. They rang on the roof, then the porch, then the steps. Each ring seemed to press against my chest with weight. I grabbed my service weapon and went to the living room. The front door shook under a single, powerful blow. Something massive stepped onto the porch, pressing the snow down into deep, perfect impressions. I couldn't see clearly through the snowstorm, but I could feel its presence. Tall, broad, wrapped in red, matted with grime and age. Bells hung from a wide belt, each one larger than my fist. The beard was long, tangled, stiff, eyes black and deep reflecting the faint glow of the porch light. I fired. Multiple rounds. The bullets sank into the coat like water. The figure stepped forward. Each step made the floor groan. Its voice, when it spoke, rumbled like thunder, yet was oddly calm. "She has been good," it said, nodding toward Emily. "But obedience is tested." I lunged, trying to reach her. It moved faster than a man of that size could possibly move, snapping up to the stairs in moments. Emily screamed, but her voice was muted somehow, swallowed by the enormous presence of the figure. I tried to hold it back, but it was futile. I remember crashing into the hallway wall, the world tilting, the sound of bells overwhelming everything. Then silence. When I regained consciousness, the house was empty. The storm had passed. Snow fell softly outside. Claire was alive, unconscious in the closet where she had hidden. Emily was gone. They found her 3 days later by wandering near the edge of the forest behind our house. She was unharmed, calm, as if nothing had happened. She said simply, "He said I was very good." The pattern continued every December. Houses decorated early, children who believe, chimneys damaged, adults gone. The warnings are always subtle: letters, small gifts, bells on the roof. Children are taken and returned, always changed. Obedient, eerily calm, too quiet for their age. Emily is 11 now. She sets a plate of cookies and milk by the fireplace every Christmas Eve. Sometimes, late at night, I hear the bells. Slow, heavy, patient, walking across the roof, waiting. I don't believe in Santa Claus. I know he is real. Story the end. I had always worked dead-end jobs in the Midwest, never enough money to cover more than rent and groceries. When I saw the ad for Santa Needed, private estate, December 20 to 25th, excellent pay, I didn't hesitate. It promised good money and easy work. Entertain children for a week, take pictures, hand out gifts. Simple. I needed the money to pay for heating that winter. What could go wrong? The estate was outside a small town in northern Wisconsin, a place so quiet that the wind off the frozen lake was the loudest sound. The mansion was enormous, dark wood turrets, multiple chimneys, and it felt empty, even as I pulled up in my beat-up car. The snow crunched under the tires and the faint smell of pine drifted through the cold air. There was no one to greet me. Only the front door loomed, black and massive, with a brass knocker shaped like a stag. Before I could knock, the door opened. An elderly woman, thin and pale, stood in the doorway. Her eyes were gray and sharp, scanning me as if she could see straight through to my chest. She didn't smile, but her presence demanded attention. "You're here for the Santa position?" she asked softly, her voice almost lost to the wind. "Yes," I said, trying to sound confident. She nodded once and gestured for me to follow. Inside, the house smelled faintly of smoke and old wood. Every step on the dark-stained hardwood echoed. She led me to a small room off the main hall, walls lined with shelves of old books, shelves of dolls with glassy eyes, shelves of toys, all meticulously dusted. On a stand in the center of the room hung a Santa suit. The velvet was dark red, almost maroon, and the fur trim looked stiff, matted, yellowed with age. The boots were scuffed, the gloves cracked. "Put it on," she said, handing me a small brass bell with a worn handle. "Do not drop it. Do not lose it." I slid into the suit. It smelled faintly of smoke and something metallic, like iron. Heavy, too heavy, though it fit. When I touched the bell, it seemed to hum faintly in my hand. "Tonight you will practice," she said. "Tomorrow, the family will arrive." I nodded, though unease started crawling up my spine. The first night was restless. The house groaned. The wind rattled windows and doors. Around 3 in the morning, I woke to a faint ringing. Not from the bell I held, but a deeper, slower toll, echoing through the hallways. My heart pounded. I followed the sound cautiously, my boots silent on the carpeted floors. The ringing stopped. Then I heard it again, closer, heavier, coming from the stairwell. I froze, breath catching. The sound vanished before I could see anything. I convinced myself it was just the house settling. I forced myself to sleep, but the dream came anyway. I was climbing a series of chimneys, endless chimneys stacked on top of each other like towers. Smoke filled my mouth. I crawled through brick tight against my chest, soot burning my lungs. Something laughed below me. Not a child, not a person. Something older, something terrible. When I woke, the bell was on the floor beside the bed. I hadn't touched it. I picked it up, and the warmth radiating from it was unnatural, almost alive. The next day, the family arrived, a couple in their 40s, their 2 children, and a grandmother who spoke sparingly. The kids were pale, eyes too sharp, too intelligent for their age. The parents smiled nervously, thanking me for coming. The children didn't smile. They just watched me, moving silently, like predators assessing prey. I practiced with them, taking photos, handing out gifts. It went smoothly until the boy, maybe 7, climbed onto my lap. His hair was dark, sticking to his forehead with a layer of snow from the morning's play. "You're not him," he said softly. I laughed nervously. "Of course I am." He shook his head. "You're wearing his clothes, but you're not him." The girl on my other knee leaned close, whispering in a voice I couldn't hear. The parents smiled at me, but I could see their eyes dart nervously to the children. Something was wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house moaned. I heard footsteps in rooms I hadn't entered. Shadows moved in the corners. Every mirror reflected the suit wrong, the beard too thick, the eyes too pale. I touched the bell. It vibrated slightly, as though it knew I was scared. On Christmas Eve, everything changed. The house was quiet. The children didn't play. The parents looked tense, refusing to meet my eyes. I was about to enter the living room to start the evening's routine when the bell rang. Not from my hand, from somewhere else. Lower, heavier, deliberate. From the hallway, I saw him, Santa Claus. Not the friendly mall version. This man was enormous, taller than any human should be. His coat was dark red, stained in places I didn't want to imagine. His boots were cracked and scuffed, his beard long and tangled. His eyes were pale, almost white, and when they met mine, I felt pressure behind my skull, like he was reaching inside my head. "You've worn my skin," he said, voice like metal grinding on ice. "You've taken my place." I'm just filling in," I stammered. "They never let you choose," he said. "They never do." The children moved behind me, silent, watching. Their parents cowered, eyes wide. I felt the suit tighten. My hands moved to the bell, almost of their own accord. One toll, two tolls. The sound was deafening. The air seemed to vibrate, walls bending, lights flickering. He didn't move, just stood there, massive, waiting. The floor dropped away, chimneys, rooftops, endless snow, fires in homes I'd never seen. They all swirled around me. The bell rang again, heavier, longer, and suddenly I knew. This wasn't about gifts. This was judgment. Punishment. Rewards, yes, but twisted. Fear as currency. "You wear the suit now," he said. "You know what must be done." I screamed. My body moved against my will. I was him now. I felt the rooftops, the chimneys, the fires, all of it inside me. I was everywhere. I was nothing. I woke hours later in the snow outside the mansion. My body ached. The suit lay beside me, torn. The bell was silent. Smoke rose from the estate. 3 bodies inside. Children survived. No one could explain what happened. I moved away, changed my name, tried to live a normal life. But every Christmas Eve I hear it. The bell, deep, slow, calling me. The pressure behind my eyes returns. I wake to the suit. I wake to the smoke. I wake to the fire. Santa Claus is real, and once you wear the suit, he never truly lets you go. Story the end. I was 12 the first time I realized that Santa Claus, at least the one who came to my town, wasn't just a harmless character. My hometown of Riverside, Ohio, was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where nothing happened that didn't ripple through the population like a stone thrown into a pond. The holidays were sacred. Streets were lined with lights, shops competed for the most elaborate window displays, and the centerpiece of it all was the annual Christmas parade. The final float, as it always had been, carried the same Santa Claus, an old man named Arthur Kemp. Everyone called him Art. He had been Santa for decades, longer than any of the adults could remember. Art had white hair, a thick beard, and a deep, booming laugh that shook his belly when he smiled. He was beloved, trusted, and most importantly, omnipresent during the holiday season. I first met Art during the church bazaar. My mom had dragged me along to help set up the craft tables. I hated being there. The church basement smelled like pine, wax, and something faintly metallic like rust. Children ran between tables, shrieking with excitement, clutching coins for the raffle. Art sat in his chair, in full Santa attire, a red velvet suit with crisp white trim, boots polished to a reflective shine. His eyes scanned the crowd, and when they landed on a child, he smiled in a way that felt precise, measured. Not warm, exactly. Deliberate. I remember the first time he spoke directly to me. I was carrying a box of decorations back to the storage closet. My hands were full, and I didn't hear him approach. Then a voice, soft, gravely, and unnervingly close, said, "Careful, son. That's heavy." I nearly dropped the box. I looked up. Art was standing there, towering over me, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. The air smelled like peppermint, old leather, and something else I couldn't place, something sour. "You've been helping a lot," he said, leaning slightly toward me. "I like that. Helpful children, always noticed." I mumbled a thank you. My instincts screamed to leave, but I couldn't move. There was something in his gaze that made the room feel smaller, heavier. After that, I started seeing patterns. Art was everywhere in December. School assemblies, nursing homes, the firehouse Christmas tree lighting, even at local stores helping with charity drives. No matter where you went, he was there. Always watching, always knowing. And every year, some children disappeared. Not all, but enough to make patterns noticeable if you paid attention. The first disappearance I remember was a girl named Jenny Thomas. She was 7, lived 2 blocks over. She went missing on December 21st. Her parents claimed she had wandered off while playing outside, but she never came home. The town searched for days. Dogs, volunteers, flashlights, the river banks, nothing. No footprints leading into the woods, no sign of struggle, nothing at all. Only an empty swing at the park where she had been playing. Art attended the vigil, hat in hand, eyes downcast. People found his presence comforting. No one thought to question him. He was Santa. He had to be safe. By the time I was 15, the disappearances had continued. Not all children, but a handful every few years, always in December, always connected by proximity to art. I started volunteering at the church myself, mainly to stay busy and keep my mind off it. That year, I was assigned to help manage the line for Santa photos. I stood near the classroom door that Art used as his workshop, watching the children file past him. He crouched for each child, hands resting on knees, eyes sharp, scanning, not looking at the camera, not looking at the parents, but the children. Always the children. It was then that I saw something I can't explain. A little girl named Bethany lingered longer than usual. I knocked on the door, pretending to check on her. Art's voice called out softly, "Almost done." A pause. Then the door opened. She emerged, cheeks flushed, eyes wide and distant. She didn't speak, didn't look at her mother, didn't even smile. She walked past quietly. That night, I dreamt of her in the snow, calling for help, but no one could hear. 2 days later, Bethany disappeared, never found. When I left Riverside for college, I tried to forget. I tried to bury the memories under books, city noise, and late-night parties. But the pattern haunted me. Every December, news stories of missing children would flash across the national wires. Patterns emerged if you looked. Midwestern towns, December disappearances, children last seen in proximity to local holiday figures. Always Santa. Always a trusted adult. Always absent of suspicion. And in every case, there was a man like Art. Omnipresent, seemingly harmless, but always watching. Years later, I returned to Riverside after my mother's health declined. Art was still Santa. Older, slower, but still there. Still omnipresent. Still watching. I worked at the local paper part-time, archiving old events and covering school stories. One day, while going through the archives of past Christmas events, I noticed something that had escaped me as a child. In every photograph of Art with children, his eyes weren't on the camera. They were on the child. Measuring, judging, memorizing. I shivered as I realized that this was not magic. It was a ritual, a habit, a methodical observation. I began looking into old police records, newspapers, missing persons reports, dates, towns, ages. A pattern emerged. Always December, always children, always interactions with Art. I compiled the data, shared it with my editor, expecting skepticism. He laughed. "You're chasing ghosts," he said. "Art is a town treasure. Don't ruin a tradition with paranoia." That December, Art called the newspaper office personally. His voice was deep, calm, deliberate. "I hear you've been asking questions. Thought we should talk." I debated ignoring him, but curiosity and some residual guilt from the disappearances I had witnessed as a child drove me to accept. His farmhouse on the outskirts of town was cold, smelled of pine, cinnamon, and dust. Every surface was festooned with decorations. Every room contained toys, candy, ornaments. He greeted me warmly, offered coffee. His hands were steady, but his eyes were sharp, alive. "You know why people trust Santa?" he asked. I shook my head. "Because Santa sees everything. He judges, he rewards, he punishes. That's what makes him necessary," he said. I felt my stomach twist. Accidents happen. Stories get in the way. People forget duty, tradition, but I remember everything. He continued. I left. My car wouldn't start at first. He watched silently from the porch as I struggled. Finally, it started. He tipped his hat. I drove off, heart racing, aware of eyes tracking me even as I escaped. That December, a 10-year-old boy named Lucas disappeared. The town searched for days. No trace. Harlan Art was questioned, alibis verified, witnesses corroborated, photographs taken. Nothing. The parade proceeded as scheduled. Art rode through town on the final float, smiling, waving. That night, his farmhouse caught fire. He was found dead inside. Investigators discovered a hidden basement crawl space. Inside were boxes filled with toys, clothing, photographs, hair, and names carved into wooden beams. Decades worth of evidence of the children who had vanished under his watch. National media covered it. Riverside canceled all public Christmas events the following year. People offered explanations, copycats, trauma, coincidence. But anyone who had grown up there knew the truth. Even after his death, incidents continued. Children reported seeing Santa where he could not physically be. Toys appeared on porches of houses where no one had ordered them. Candy canes left in mailboxes, old and brittle. Snowmen outside homes at odd hours, standing unnaturally still. One Christmas Eve, years later, I was working late at the newspaper office. I heard bells outside, slow, deliberate. I looked out the window. A figure stood under the streetlight. The suit was tattered, older, singed, the beard half-burned, eyes sharp, alive. He tipped his hat at me. I locked myself in the bathroom and called the police. When they arrived, there was nothing, only snow and a single footprint pressed deep into the ground. I left Riverside again, permanently. I no longer decorate for the holidays. I do not attend parades. I do not let my daughter believe in Santa. I lock doors, windows, fireplaces. Every December I watch the news, see reports of missing children, strange sightings, and I know the truth. Santa Claus isn't just a story. He isn't just a man. He's a role, a mask, a tradition that hides its teeth behind a smile. And as long as someone is willing to wear the suit, keep the list, justify the watching, Santa never truly dies. Story. The end. The first winter I worked night security in upstate New York was the winter I stopped believing that Santa Claus was just a story we tell kids to make them behave. I was 32, divorced, and living out of a rented room above a closed bait shop near the edge of town. The mall on Route 17 had hired a third-party security company to keep an eye on the building after hours. Retail theft had spiked, and there were rumors of squatters breaking in through the loading docks. My shift ran from 10 at night to 6 in the morning, 7 days a week through December. It paid just enough to keep the lights on and the heat low. The mall was already dying. Half the stores were shuttered, their windows covered in brown paper or sun-faded posters advertising sales that would never come. The Christmas decorations were the last thing management still paid for. Plastic wreaths hung from the railings and fake garlands drooped over empty storefronts. Speakers played instrumental carols on a loop that echoed down the long corridors after closing. At night, with the lights dimmed and the escalators silent, the place felt like a mausoleum built for capitalism. The Santa display was set up in the central atrium, under a skylight that showed the black winter sky. A big red chair, a plastic fireplace, fake snow, and a backdrop painted like the North Pole. During the day, kids lined up to sit on Santa's lap while their parents took photos. At night, the chair sat empty, the red velvet looking dark and damp in the shadows. The mall had hired an older man to play Santa. Real beard, real belly, deep voice. His name on the schedule was Harold Kessler. He worked afternoons and early evenings, then left before closing. On my first night, the day guard warned me about the noises. "You'll hear stuff," he said, handing over the radio. "Pipes, animals, wind through the vents. Don't go chasing ghosts." I laughed because that's what you do when you don't know better. The first few nights were uneventful. I walked the corridors, checked locked doors, watched my breath fog the air near the loading docks. Around midnight, I'd sit at the security desk near the atrium, drink bad coffee, and listen to the carols loop. The Santa display stayed empty, just another prop. On the fourth night, I noticed footprints in the fake snow around the chair. They were large, boot-shaped impressions, deep enough to show tread. I assumed some kid or employee had stepped in it during the day. But these prints looked fresh. The fake snow was a mix of foam and crushed plastic. Once disturbed, it didn't settle back. These prints were crisp, leading from behind the backdrop to the front of the chair, then away toward a maintenance corridor. I radioed it in. The dispatcher told me to log it and keep moving. Around 2 in the morning, while I was patrolling near the food court, I heard bells. Not the recorded kind from the speakers, but sharp, metallic jingling, close and directional. It sounded like someone walking, each step accompanied by a faint chime. I rose, listening. The sound stopped. Hello? Hello? I called out, feeling stupid immediately. Nothing answered. I checked the food court, the bathrooms, the storage closets. No one. When I got back to the atrium, the Santa chair was occupied. An old man sat there, hunched forward, hands folded on his stomach. He wore the full Santa suit, red coat, white trim, black belt, but it looked older than the one I'd seen during the day. The fabric was dull, the fur yellowed. His boots were heavy and scuffed. His beard hung in uneven clumps down his chest. "Sir," I said, hand hovering near my radio, "the mall is closed." He lifted his head slowly. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, set deep in a face lined like dried leather. When he smiled, his teeth were brown and worn down like old piano keys. "Working late," he said. His voice was low and rough, but it carried. "You can't be here," I said. "Employees need to check out with security." He looked around the empty mall, the darkened stores, the echoing corridors. "I've been working late a long time," he said. "Longer than you." I told myself it was Harold, the mall's Santa, pulling a prank or grabbing something he'd forgotten. But something was off. Harold was heavy, but this man was big in a different way, thick-boned, his shoulders stretching the seams of the coat, and there was a smell like cold metal and old smoke. "Can I see your badge?" I asked. He laughed softly, a sound like paper tearing. "Badges change," he said. "The work doesn't." I reached for my radio. "Dispatch, I've got..." He stood up and the bells on his belt jingled, but he was taller than I expected. He leaned close and I could see frost clinging to the white hairs of his beard, melting and dripping onto the carpet. "Be good," he said, almost kindly. Then he walked away toward the maintenance corridor. I followed because that was my job and because some stubborn part of me refused to be scared of a man in a costume. The corridor door swung open and a blast of cold air hit me, sharp enough to sting. The lights flickered. When I stepped through, the corridor was empty. I searched the mall for an hour. There was no sign of him. No footprints this time. Dispatch told me to write it up and suggested I'd imagined it. The next morning, the day shift guard laughed when I told him. "Old Santa ghost," he said. "He shows up when you've had too much coffee." But when I checked the log, I saw something that made my stomach drop. 2 winters earlier, a guard named Thomas Reed had written almost the same report. Bells. An old Santa. Pale eyes. He'd quit a week later. Things escalated after that. Every night, the footprints appeared around the Santa display. Sometimes small ones, like children's shoes, circling the chair. Sometimes larger ones, heavy and deep. The bells returned, always just out of sight. The temperature in the atrium dropped after midnight, cold enough that the fake snow never fully melted during the day. On December 12th, a maintenance worker named Luis went missing. He'd stayed late to fix a leaking pipe near the loading docks. His truck was still in the parking lot the next morning. The police searched the mall and found nothing. Management chalked it up to him leaving on his own, maybe drunk, maybe trouble at home. But I remembered the way the old Santa had smelled of cold metal and smoke, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the mall had swallowed him. That night, I checked the maintenance corridor again. At the far end, behind a door marked seasonal storage, I found a space I hadn't noticed before. The door opened onto a narrow room that smelled like pine sap and iron. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with boxes labeled in neat, old-fashioned handwriting. Names, hundreds of them. Some I recognized. Kids from town, families I'd seen at the mall. Some were crossed out in red. At the back of the room stood a workbench. On it lay a pile of toys. Wooden, hand-carved, rough. A rocking horse with a cracked mane. A doll with mismatched eyes. A tin train bent out of shape. They were heavy in my hands, cold to the touch. Behind the bench was a hook in the wall, and hanging from it was a red coat. I didn't touch it. I backed out of the room, closed the door, and radioed dispatch with shaking hands. They told me to stay put, that police were on their way. While I waited, the bells started. They came from everywhere at once, echoing down the corridors, bouncing off the walls. The carols on the speakers slowed, warped, notes dragging like they were being pulled underwater. The lights dimmed. I ran. I didn't know where, just away from the sound. The mall twisted around me, corridors stretching longer than they should have, doors appearing where there had been blank walls. The Santa display loomed ahead, lit by a pale, bluish glow. The old man sat in the chair again, the hands folded, waiting. "You shouldn't be back there," he said. "That's for work." "Where's Luis?" I shouted. He tilted his head. "Naughty list," he said. "It gets long." I pulled my flashlight and shined it at his face. The beam reflected off his eyes, making them shine like ice. His smile widened, splitting the skin at the corners of his mouth. "I give," he said. "I take. Balance." He stood, and the air dropped to freezing. Frost spread across the floor in delicate patterns that racing toward me. I felt my boots stick, the soles freezing in place. He stepped closer, and I could see beneath the beard now, the skin beneath thin and gray, stretched tight over something not quite human. "You watch," he said. "You keep the doors. That's good work." Sirens wailed faintly outside, distant and muffled, like they were underwater. The frost reached my ankles, crept up my legs, numbing them. I screamed into my radio, but all that came out was static. Then, from somewhere behind him, I heard a child's voice. "Santa?" He turned, distracted, and in that moment the frost receded, cracking like thin ice. I ripped my feet free and ran, not stopping until I burst through the front doors into the cold night air. The sirens were closer now. Real. The police searched the mall again. They found the storage room, empty. No boxes, no toys, no coat. They chalked up my story to stress. I quit that night. In the weeks that followed, more things came out. Luis's body was found in the woods, frozen solid, miles from town. The coroner said, exposure. Another guard from years back had gone missing around Christmas, never found. An old newspaper article surfaced about a fire in the 1930s. A toy workshop on the edge of town burned down after accusations that the owner was hurting children. The man's name was never recorded. The building had stood where the mall was built decades later. I moved away in January. I don't work security anymore. I don't go to malls in December. When I hear bells, my hands shake. Last week, I got a Christmas card in the mail, no return address. Inside was a list, written in neat, old-fashioned handwriting. My name was on it, crossed out in red. Story the end. I grew up in the outskirts of Elmwood, Pennsylvania, a town so small that everyone knew everyone else's business and secrets didn't stay buried for long. Winters there were harsh, the kind where snow piled so high you had to dig a trench just to get to the mailbox, and the wind bit through layers of coats like teeth. But winter also meant Christmas, and Christmas in Elmwood was sacred. The town's entire identity revolved around it. The parade, the lights, the tree in the square, and most of all, the man who played Santa Claus every year. For decades, it had been Harold Jensen. Harold was a retired mailman with a belly that shook when he laughed, and a voice that carried comfort to children and parents alike. He knew everyone by name, remembered which child liked vanilla over chocolate, who had a dog named Max who had been naughty or nice the year before. He made Santa real in a way that adults didn't notice but kids instinctively felt. When Harold died in the spring of 1999, everyone mourned. The town was determined to keep the tradition alive, but none of the replacements ever felt right. They were awkward, unsure, stiff in the suit, with laughs that didn't carry warmth. That year, the town hired a man named Victor Cole. Victor was a newcomer to Elmwood, a tall, thin man with hollowed cheeks and eyes that seemed darker than they should have been. He arrived in early November, just as the first snow had started, in a truck that looked like it hadn't moved in years. He wore a coat that was too large and gloves that were frayed, but when he walked into the town hall and asked to apply for the Santa job, he had a calm confidence that unnerved most people. By December, Victor had become the town's Santa. He arrived at the parade early, waving and smiling, sitting in the fire truck like Harold had. But there was something about him that set the children on edge. They didn't run toward him. They lingered, hesitant, and sometimes when he waved, their smiles faltered. I noticed it first when my little brother Jamie had his turn on Santa's lap at the school's holiday carnival. Jamie whispered something to Victor, and instead of laughing or nodding, Victor's smile froze and he leaned closer. When he spoke, it was barely audible. "Make sure you lock your bedroom door tonight." Jamie's eyes went wide. He didn't say anything else, and when he told me later, he insisted it was a joke. But that night, I found the bedroom door unlocked, the lock mechanism bent, as if someone had tried to force it. Over the next week, odd things began to happen in Elmwood. Packages left on doorsteps were not ordinary gifts. They contained objects no one could explain. Animal bones, old photographs of townsfolk as children, shards of broken toys with sharp edges, and once a live mouse tied with red ribbon, squealing. Police were called, but there were no fingerprints, no tracks in the snow. People whispered about Victor, but he was careful, charming, polite. He never admitted anything. He never left evidence. Then came the disappearances. First was young Tommy Leary, age 8. He was last seen running to the corner store for candy while his mother waited in the car. She returned to find the boy gone, the snow around the store completely undisturbed. The police searched the woods behind the school, the creek that ran through town, and even the old mine on the outskirts, but he was never found. The only clue was a red glove left on the sidewalk outside the store. 2 nights later, the Grayson family woke to find their living room filled with snow, as if a blizzard had blown through, even though all windows were shut. On the sofa, lying in the snow, were small, carefully folded notes addressed to each family member, warning them about their secrets, debts, lies, moments of cruelty long forgotten. No fingerprints, no footprints leading to or from the living room. And in the center of the room, a single red hat, soft and familiar. Panic began to spread, though no one wanted to admit it. The town tried to continue life as normal. Church services, the school concert, holiday shopping, but Victor was always there, appearing in places no one had invited him. He walked the streets at night, leaving footprints in fresh snow that led in impossible directions, disappearing into nothing. Some residents swore they saw him standing in the woods outside their homes, just watching, smiling faintly in the moonlight. One night, I stayed up late, unable to sleep, staring out my window. I had seen Victor earlier that evening at the diner, sitting in a booth in the corner, hands folded, watching the snowfall. Now, hours later, I saw him again, standing at the edge of our property, not moving, not breathing, yet perfectly visible through the snowstorm that had suddenly blown in. My heart froze. I watched as he raised a hand, and the snow seemed to rise around him like a wave. I ran to the phone to call my parents, only to discover the line was dead. The power went out. All of Elmwood plunged into darkness, leaving only the wind and the occasional jingle of a distant bell. By Christmas Eve, the town was deserted. Those who had remained barricaded themselves indoors, keeping children close. I stayed in my room with Jamie, candles lit, knives and fireplace tools at hand. That night, the bells began, soft, faint, carried on the wind at first, then closer, louder, until they seemed to echo through the house. And then came the knock, slow, measured, polite almost. "Open the door," Victor said, his voice carrying under the howl of the storm. "I've brought gifts." I froze, gripping a fireplace poker. The doorknob rattled as though it were alive. Jamie clung to my arm, crying softly. "Is it Santa?" he whispered. "No," I said, though my voice shook. "Not anymore." The door handle turned. It was locked. I had checked. And yet, the door opened inward with a quiet creak. Snow swirled in as he stepped inside, red suit bright against the darkness, boots leaving wet imprints that froze as soon as they hit the floor. "You've been watching," he said softly. "I know you've seen." I raised the poker. "Stay out." Victor's smile didn't falter. "It doesn't matter," he said. "You knew the rules. Christmas is not for hiding. It is for remembering. And I remember everything." Before I could react, the room temperature dropped sharply. Frost spread across the walls and windows, delicate yet fast, crawling toward the center of the room like living veins. The candles guttered but didn't go out. Jamie screamed, and Victor turned to look at him, his expression unreadable beneath the beard. "You've been naughty," he said, voice calm and soft, almost affectionate. "But you can learn." I swung the poker. It passed through him as if striking air, but when it re-emerged, the metal was rimed with ice. He tilted his head, examining it like a curious child. Then he stepped forward. The air grew heavier, pressing down on my chest. I stumbled backward. "I am Santa," he said. "I am the list. I am the balance. Those who are forgotten, those who are guilty, those who lie, they are mine to judge." A shadow moved behind him, a distortion of his figure, taller and wider, stretching impossibly. From that shadow, I saw shapes, children with wide, fearful eyes, adults frozen in terror, all of them waiting. I realized then that the stories were true. Victor was not a man. He was a vessel. He wore the suit, but the suit had power beyond comprehension. The storm outside intensified, rattling the roof, howling through the walls. The bells grew louder, each chime a hammer against my skull. Victor lifted his arms, and the snow swirled upward, a vortex inside the room, bending physics, reality. Jamie clung to me, whimpering, as the frost crept over his small hands. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Victor was gone, leaving only the red hat on the floor and the smell of pipe smoke, mixed with pine. The snow had melted as if nothing had happened. The storm had lifted. Outside, Elmwood was eerily quiet, the town frozen under a sheet of ice and silence. I stayed in that house until January. When I finally went outside, Elmwood was empty. Families had fled, abandoning homes, possessions, everything. The school was deserted, stores boarded up, and the red hat was gone. Victor never returned to Elmwood in person. But every December, the bells come back. Sometimes faint, sometimes loud enough to vibrate the walls. Sometimes, when I walk the streets alone, I see a figure in red standing in the shadows, watching, waiting. I have left the town now, moved hundreds of miles away. But the fear travels with me. Every year when I hear the first jingle in December, I check the locks, I check the windows, and I make sure the children around me know Santa is not always what he seems. And when you see him, you do not wave, you do not smile, and you do not leave the door open. Because he remembers, he keeps the list, and he always comes back. Story the end. I used to think the worst thing that could happen on Christmas Eve was a power outage or a drunk uncle starting an argument. I didn't believe in Santa Claus anymore, not really. But I believed in the harmless version of him, the mall Santas, the bell ringers, the red suits, and fake beards. And I believed he was a symbol, a lie parents told their kids to make winter feel warmer. What happened in December of 1998 changed that. It took years before I could say it out loud, and even now I don't say it lightly. This is what happened, exactly as I remember it, and as I've tried to forget it ever since. I was a deputy sheriff in northern Michigan back then, stationed out of a small county office near the edge of a forest that seemed to swallow towns whole. Winters were brutal. Snowdrifts could bury fences, and the trees stood like black ribs against the white sky. Christmas had a way of making everything feel quieter and more dangerous at the same time. People stayed indoors, roads went empty, and if something went wrong, help could be hours away. On December 23rd, we got a call just after dusk. A woman from a rural address off County Road 12 said someone had been on her roof. She wasn't joking or hysterical. She sounded confused, more than scared. She said she'd heard footsteps, slow and heavy, pacing back and forth. When she went outside with a flashlight, she saw tracks in the snow leading up to the side of the house, straight to the roof line. No ladder, just footprints that stopped at the wall. My partner that night was a guy named Rick Harlan, a former Marine who didn't scare easy. He laughed when the dispatcher relayed the message, said maybe it was kids messing around. But when we drove out there, even he went quiet. The woman, Mrs. Talbot, was in her 70s, lived alone and hadn't had company in days. The tracks were there all right, deep impressions in fresh snow, size 12 or 13 boots, heading from the tree line right up to her house. They ended at the wall beneath the eaves. No drag marks, no signs of climbing. Just stopped. Rick climbed up onto the roof using a ladder we brought from the truck. He radioed down that there was nothing up there. No footprints on the shingles, no damage, nothing. When he came back down, his face was tight. He said the snow on the roof was untouched, smooth like it had just fallen. We told Mrs. Talbot it was probably an animal or drifting snow and advised her to stay with her sister in town. She agreed, but she kept staring at the chimney, her lips moving like she was praying. We wrote it up as a disturbance and moved on. That was our mistake. The next morning, Christmas Eve, the call volume picked up. A break-in at a gas station. A domestic dispute that turned out to be nothing. Then, just before noon, a welfare check on a family in a subdivision near the woods. No answer at the door, newspapers piling up, car in the driveway. We knocked, announced ourselves, tried the door. It was unlocked. Inside the house was warm, decorated for Christmas. Lights blinking on the tree, presents underneath, stockings on the mantel. The smell hit us first, sweet and wrong. Rick swore under his breath. We found them in the living room. The parents were on the couch, sitting upright like they'd fallen asleep watching TV. The kids were on the floor near the tree, still in their pajamas. There was no blood, no signs of struggle, just eyes wide open, mouths frozen in expressions that looked like surprise or awe. The coroner later said hypothermia wasn't possible. There were no toxins in their systems, no injuries that explained death. Officially, it was undetermined. Unofficially, nobody had a clue. What stuck with me was the fireplace. The flue was open, and there were ashes scattered on the hearth, but no fire had been lit recently. Mixed in with the ashes were bits of something dark and sticky. At first glance, it looked like melted chocolate. Later, lab tests would say it was organic, but not identifiable as anything specific. Above the fireplace, scratched into the wood of the mantel, was a word. Nice. Rick tried to joke about it. May said maybe it was some kind of sick prank. But I could see the way his eyes kept going back to that word. We both knew pranks didn't leave families dead without a mark. By late afternoon, rumors were spreading. People talked about a man in a Santa suit, knocking on doors and leaving strange gifts. Someone claimed their dog had gone missing after barking at something on the roof. Another said they'd heard bells in the woods at night. Dispatch was overwhelmed, and the sheriff told us to keep things quiet, not to cause panic. Around 6 p.m., snow started coming down hard. Thick flakes that swallowed headlights and muffled sound. Rick and I were parked near the edge of town when a call came in from a convenience store. Armed robbery in progress. The clerk said the robber was dressed as Santa Claus. We arrived fast. The store lights were on, but the door was open, bell jingling in the wind. Inside, the clerk was gone. The cash register was untouched. On the counter sat a small wrapped box, red paper, green ribbon. Rick reached for it, then stopped. I could see his hand shaking. We opened it carefully. Inside was a lump of coal, black and glossy, still warm. There was a smell like burned hair. That's when we heard the bells. Not jingle bells, not the cheerful sound you hear in songs. These were heavy, dull, like iron striking iron. They came from outside, slow and deliberate, circling the building. Rick drew his weapon. I did the same. We stepped out into the snow, scanning the white blur beyond the lights. At first, I thought it was just shadows. Then I saw the red, a shape moving between the trees across the road. Tall, broad. The red was deep, almost black in places, and it seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. As it stepped closer, I could make out fur trim crusted with ice, boots leaving deep holes in the snow. Each step came with the sound of bells, not from the suit, but from somewhere inside it. "Sheriff's Department!" Rick shouted. "Stop where you are!" It stopped. The shape turned its head slowly. I swear to God, its beard was real, white and thick, frozen at the tips. The face behind it was red, not from cold, but like raw meat. Its eyes were dark pits, reflecting nothing. It spoke my name, not loudly, just enough to carry through the snow. My name, exactly as it appears on my badge. My blood went cold. I hadn't told Rick. I hadn't told anyone. Rick fired first. The shot echoed, and the figure staggered back a step. There was no blood. No cry of pain. It straightened, looked down at the bullet hole in its coat, and laughed. The sound was wrong, too deep, like it came from a cave. Then it moved. I've seen men run fast. I've chased suspects through woods and fields. This thing didn't run. It was just suddenly closer, crossing ground without seeming to touch it. Rick fired again and again, backing up, shouting. I felt something hit me hard in the chest, like a hammer. I went down, gasping, snow filling my mouth. When I looked up, Rick was gone. There were tracks in the snow leading away, deep and dragging, like something heavy had been pulled. They went into the woods and disappeared. Backup arrived minutes later. They found me half buried in snow, bruised and shaking, my vest cracked but intact. There was no sign of Rick, no blood, no shell casings where he'd fired. The convenience store footage showed static from the moment the bells started. I was put on leave after that. Officially, Rick was listed as missing, presumed dead. The sheriff told me to stop talking about Santas and bells. The town held a vigil. People brought candles and sang carols. Snow kept falling, covering everything. I should have left. I know that now, but I didn't. I needed to know what had happened to Rick, to the family, to Mrs. Talbot's roof. I started digging through old records at the county office, staying late after everyone else went home. I found references going back decades. Missing persons reports around Christmas, fires with no cause, livestock slaughtered, left arranged in neat piles, always in winter, always near the woods. In a ledger from 1923, I found a note written in shaky handwriting. Man in red seen entering homes by chimney. Children gone by morning. Sheriff refuses to pursue. Says it's punishment. Punishment. On Christmas Eve night, I went back out there alone. The snow had stopped and the moon was bright enough to cast shadows. I drove toward the forest, parked at the edge of the road, and walked in with a flashlight and my service weapon. I don't know what I expected. Maybe I thought I could reason with it. Maybe I thought I could kill it. The woods were quiet, too quiet. No wind, no animals. Then I saw the light ahead, warm and flickering. A cabin I'd never noticed before, half buried in snow, smoke rising from the chimney. Bells rang softly as I approached, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would give me away. Inside, the cabin was bigger than it should have been. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with toys. Old toys. Handmade dolls with glass eyes, wooden trains, tin soldiers. In the center of the room stood a workbench. On it lay a red coat, patched and mended countless times. Beneath it, on the floor, were bones. Human bones, small and large, arranged carefully. The thing stood with its back to me, humming a tune I recognized from childhood. It turned slowly, smiling. Its teeth were yellow and sharp. "You came back," it said. "Few do." I asked it what it was, why it did this. It laughed again, that awful sound. "I give what is deserved," it said. "I take what is owed." It showed me a sack in the corner. I didn't want to look, but I did. Inside were pieces of clothing I recognized. Rick's jacket, his badge. I don't remember firing my weapon. I remember the recoil, the deafening noise in the small space. The bullets hit, tearing through red cloth and flesh that wasn't flesh. The thing roared, the cabin shaking. It lunged at me, and I ran. I don't know how I got out of the woods. I don't know how long I ran. When I came to, I was in my truck, engine running, Christmas morning light creeping over the horizon. The cabin was gone when others went looking later. No clearing, no tracks, just trees and snow. I left the department soon after, moved south, tried to forget. But every December, when the nights get longer and the air gets cold, I hear bells in my dreams. Sometimes I wake up with soot on my hands. Sometimes I find a piece of coal on my doorstep. They never found Rick. They never solved the deaths. Officially, none of it is connected. Officially, Santa Claus isn't real. But every year, somewhere in the woods, something puts on that red coat again, and every year, it checks its list. Story the end. I never planned to tell this story. For years, I convinced myself it was safer to keep it buried, like a bad memory that would lose its power if I refused to name it. But December comes every year, and with it the same sounds, the same smells, the same images that claw their way back into my head. Bells, cold air, red fabric moving in the dark. I'm an old man now, living alone in a small house in northern Pennsylvania, and I don't expect much time left. Before I go, someone should know what really happened. The winter Santa Claus came to our town and never left. I was 10 years old in 1987, living in a place called Granger Falls, a dying mill town tucked into the mountains. Winter came early there, hard and mean. Snow piled up along the roads until the plows made narrow tunnels through it. The river froze thick enough for trucks to cross, though nobody did anymore. The paper mill had shut down 2 years before, and half the men in town were out of work. Christmas that year felt forced, like a performance we all agreed to put on because we didn't know what else to do. My father had died the previous spring in a logging accident, crushed when a cable snapped. My mother worked double shifts at the diner to keep us afloat. She tried her best to keep things normal, but I could see how tired she was, how hollow her eyes looked when she thought I wasn't watching. Money was tight. There wouldn't be many presents that year. I told her I understood, and I did, mostly. Still, I believed in Santa Claus. I don't mean in the abstract way adults talk about later as a symbol or a story. I believed he was real, that he watched and judged and came at night when everyone was asleep. I wrote him a letter in careful block letters, asking not for toys, but for my dad to come back. When I realized that was impossible, I crossed it out and asked for something else instead, for my mom to be happy again. Granger Falls had one place that still tried to make Christmas feel like Christmas, Harrington's department store. It was a 3-story brick building downtown, built back when the mill was booming. Every December they put up lights in the windows and a big Santa display on the first floor. Kids could come in, sit on Santa's lap, and get a small gift, a candy cane, maybe a cheap toy. It was one of the few free things left in town. The Santa that year wasn't the usual guy. For as long as I could remember, Santa had been played by Mr. Caldwell, a retired postman with a booming laugh and rosy cheeks. But Mr. Caldwell had died the previous winter. The store hired someone new, a man nobody seemed to know. The first time I saw him, I felt sick to my stomach. He sat on a wooden throne covered in red velvet near the front windows. The suit looked real, not the cheap felt kind, but heavy, like it had weight to it. The white trim was dull and grayish, not bright. His beard was long and thick, hanging down to his chest, but uneven, as if it grew in patches. He wore gloves even inside the warm store, dark leather ones that creaked when he moved. His eyes were what bothered me most. They were pale, almost clear, and they never seemed to blink. When kids sat on his lap, he stared at them without smiling, his mouth set in a thin line until he spoke. Then he'd grin wide, showing yellowed teeth, and ask them what they wanted for Christmas in a voice that was deep and rough, like gravel being ground together. The other kids didn't seem to notice anything wrong. They laughed and smiled and waved to their parents. I stood back, watching, my hands sweating inside my coat pockets. When his eyes met mine across the store, my heart jumped into my throat. He held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded, slow and deliberate, like he'd recognized me. That night, I had a dream. I was lying in my bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to move. The room was dark, lit only by moonlight reflecting off the snow outside. I heard bells in the distance, soft at first, then louder. Footsteps crunched outside, heavy and slow. Something brushed against the side of the house, followed by a scraping sound on the roof. My bedroom door creaked open. Santa stood in the doorway, filling the frame. He didn't wear his red coat now. Instead, he was dressed in dark furs, matted and stained. His beard was longer, tangled, and his eyes glowed faintly blue in the dark. He stepped closer, and the air grew cold, my breath fogging. "You've been good," he said. I tried to scream. Nothing came out. When I woke up, my sheets were soaked with sweat, and there was frost on the inside of my bedroom window. Over the next week, kids started going missing. It began with a boy named Tyler Monroe, 6 years old. He disappeared from his bedroom 3 nights before Christmas. His window was open, snow drifting in, but there were no footprints outside. The police searched the woods and the river, but found nothing. His parents were inconsolable. Then it was a girl, Emily Carter, 8. Same thing. Gone from her bed, no sign of forced entry, no tracks in the snow. People started whispering. Some blamed a drifter. Some said it was the work of a cult. Nobody said what I was thinking. Santa, I stopped sleeping. Every night I lay awake, staring at the door, listening for bells. My mom noticed how pale I looked, how jumpy I'd become. She asked what was wrong. I wanted to tell her, but the words stuck in my throat. How do you explain that Santa Claus is stealing children? 2 days before Christmas, my mom took me to Harrington's. She needed to buy a gift for her sister, and I needed boots. The store was crowded, people trying desperately to feel normal. The Santa lines stretched halfway across the floor. I tried to stay close to my mom, but when she stopped to look at sweaters, I drifted away without realizing it. When I looked up, I was standing right in front of Santa. "Hello," he said. Up close, he smelled like cold air and something metallic, like blood on snow. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes boring into mine. "Have you been good?" he asked. I nodded, unable to speak. He smiled slow and wide. "I know," he said. "I keep lists." He reached out, one gloved finger touching my cheek. The leather was icy. "You want something special this year." My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. "I want my mom to be happy," I whispered. His smile faltered just for a second. Then it returned, sharper than before. "Some things cost more than others," he said. My mom found me then, pulling me away, apologizing. Santa watched us go, his head tilted. That night, the bells came again. I was awake this time. I heard them clearly, moving closer. The air in my room dropped so suddenly it felt like being plunged into ice water. Frost bloomed across the walls. My door opened, slow and silent. He stepped inside. He was taller than I remembered, his head nearly brushing the ceiling. His red suit hung open now, revealing something beneath it. Layers of old, dark fabric and fur, stitched together crudely. His hands were bare, the skin gray and cracked, fingers too long, joints bending the wrong way. "Come," he said. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "Please," I whispered. "Please don't." He sighed, a sound like wind through dead branches. "It's Christmas Eve," he said. "Gifts must be delivered." He reached for me. In that moment, something snapped inside me. I screamed, loud and high, and threw myself off the bed. I ran past him, out into the hall, down the stairs. My mom came running from her room, panic on her face. She saw the frost, the open door, the shadow looming at the top of the stairs. "What is that?" she screamed. Santa stepped into the light. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time I saw something like uncertainty in his eyes. "She asked for happiness," he said. My mom grabbed me, pulling me behind her. "Get out," she shouted. "Get out of my house." He tilted his head. "A bargain was made," he said softly. The house shook as a wind howled through it, though every window was closed. The lights flickered, the temperature plummeted. Then there was a sound like cracking ice. Santa staggered back, his form blurring, the red suit sagging as if empty. A smell like burning filled the air. He let out a roar, deep and furious, and collapsed in on himself, folding inward until there was nothing left but a pile of frost and a single red mitten on the floor. The wind stopped. The warmth returned. We stood there for a long time, shaking. The police didn't believe us. They said it was a home invasion, that someone must have fled when confronted. They never found the missing children. Harrington's Santa never showed up for work again. The store closed the next year. But Christmas didn't end in Granger Falls. Every December after that, bells were heard in the woods. Animals were found frozen solid, eyes wide with terror. Sometimes people would wake to find frost on their windows, even when the temperature was above freezing. Sometimes a red mitten or a scrap of fur would be found on a doorstep. My mom was happier after that winter, in a fragile way. She smiled more. She laughed sometimes. But she never talked about that night. Neither did I. I left town as soon as I could. I grew up, built a life, tried to forget. But every Christmas Eve, no matter where I am, I wake in the night to the sound of bells just out of reach, and I know deep down that Santa Claus is real, and he never forgets. Story the end.